Lulu, Lubentia, Lucena, Lumilla, Luanna, Ludka learned early that a house could have weather. In Brindlewick, storms came with honest warning, darkening clouds over the hill valley, the river tightening its voice, geese lowering their heads as if bracing. In Lulu's home, storms arrived on bright mornings and quiet evenings alike, sparked by something as small as a spoon set on the wrong shelf or a window left unlatched. "You always do this," her father said, and the words were tender more than meaning. "I always do what?" her mother shot back, and her tone was flint. Lulu sat at the narrow kitchen table with her ankles crossed beneath her chair, feet tucked under, trying to make herself small enough that the air might pass over her. She loved both of them. That made it worse. Loving them was like holding two hands that refused to stop pulling in opposite directions. Between the clatter of cups and the sharp percussion of voices, she let her mind drift to what she could control: the count of her breath, the shape of her fingers when they curved like a petal, the quiet geometry of a turn done properly. Even sitting still, Lulu could feel dance moving inside her like a second heartbeat. Her mother snapped a cloth over her shoulder. "Lulu, don't leave your shoes by the hearth again. The soot will ruin them." They were drying, Lulu said, soft and quick, hoping to smooth the edge before it caught. Her father's chair scraped. They were drying where anyone with sense would dry them, near warmth. "You can't fault her for. You're defending her because you're the one who told her to leave them there," her mother said, and there it was, the twist that made every remark become an argument's beginning. Lulu pushed back from the table. "I'll move them," she said. She didn't wait for permission. In this house, permission was just another word for debate. On the hearthstone, her dance slippers sat like a small surrender, pale satin dulled at the toe, the ribbons fraying where her fingers had tied and untied them 1,000 times. She lifted them carefully, brushing a smudge away with her thumb. The damage was minor, but she could feel her mother's displeasure like heat. Her father huffed. "You see, she's responsible. She always has been." Her mother's laughter was brittle. "Responsible? She spends all day spinning about at that academy. That's not responsibility, that's indulgence." Lulu's throat tightened. She did not answer. Her mother never meant to wound her, not exactly. She meant to be heard. Everyone in this house meant to be heard. She slipped her slippers into a cloth bag and headed for the door. Her father called after her, voice sharpening with worry beneath the bluster. "Where are you going now?" "Practice," Lulu said. "At dawn," her mother protested. "The festival is in 2 weeks. You'll wear yourself to bones." Lulu paused with her hand on the latch, and for a moment she let herself imagine saying what she wanted to say. "I need it. I need the quiet. I need my own thoughts to sound like mine." Instead she smiled, small and steady. "It's only practice," she said, as if it were nothing at all. Outside, Brindlewick held her like an exhale. The village leaned into the valley's curve, roofs of grey slate and walls of pale stone freckled with lichen. Frost had kissed the grass overnight. The river ran along the lower edge, carrying winter's last cold in its mouth. Lantern posts still stood from the earlier festival preparations, their hooks empty, waiting for light. Lulu walked quickly, boots tapping a rhythm on the lane. She kept her shoulders squared, chin lifted, as if posture could defend her against the noise she'd left behind. Her full name, Lulu Lubentia Lucena Lumilla Luanna Ludka, was the village's favorite joke and her least favorite inheritance, but the name couldn't reach her here. The air smelled of wet stone and distant bread ovens. A cart creaked somewhere, a horse snorted. Ordinary sounds. Kind sounds. She passed the cobbler's shop on the corner of Lantern Row, where a small sign swung on iron hinges: Marrel and KRS shoes mended, soles fit, straps stitched. The shop's window held neat rows of boots and Sunday slippers, polished until they caught the morning like water. The door opened as Lulu approached, and Endre von Marrel stepped out, pulling his coat on with one hand and his cap with the other. He had leather dust on his knuckles, as he often did, and his hair was mussed in a way that suggested he'd been thinking more than sleeping. "Lulu," he said, like he'd been waiting for her to pass. His smile came slow, warming the edges of his face. "You're out early." "You are too," Lulu said, and felt a small looseness in her ribs. Andre's presence did that, made space. He nodded toward the cloth bag at her side. "Are those the slippers I patched last week?" Lulu gave the bag a gentle shake, as if it might answer for her. They're behaving. That's what I like to hear, Andre said solemnly, then let the seriousness crack into a grin. If they misbehave again, you tell them I'll have words. Lulu's laughter escaped before she could stop it. It sounded brighter out here. Less like something borrowed. I'll warn them. Andre fell into step beside her without asking, matching her pace. He never crowded her, never assumed. He simply moved as if the world had room for both of them. Big day today, he said, eyes on the lane ahead. Madam Celinne's doing the final selection, isn't she? Lulu's fingers tightened on her bag strap. She said she would, Lulu replied. She tried to sound indifferent. Indifference was safer than hope. Andre glanced at her, and his gaze held a softness that always made Lulu feel both seen and alarmed, as if being understood might cost her something. You'll do well. You don't know that. I do, he said simply. You dance like you mean it. The compliment landed in her chest like a small stone dropped into water, weighty and rippling. Lulu looked away quickly, focusing on the line of the academy roof visible above the next rise. Don't start, she muttered, but her mouth wanted to smile again. Andre's boots scuffed the frost. I'm not starting. I'm stating. Lulu shook her head, but a corner of her heart unknotted. She did not speak of love, neither of them did. Lulu had long ago decided love was a noisy thing, a tug-of-war, a constant proving. Andre seemed to move through affection like a quiet craft, careful stitches, patient repairs. It was easier to accept his friendship than to examine the way it steadied her. They reached the academy as the sun cleared the valley's rim. Madam Celinne Quoire's dance house stood behind a low stone wall, its windows tall and narrow, curtains drawn back to admit the pale winter light. A carved sign hung over the door, Quoire Academy of Step and Measure. Lulu liked that it said measure. It made dance sound like something real. Inside, the main studio smelled faintly of beeswax and rosewater, the wooden floor polished until it gleamed. Mirrors lined one wall, tall enough to reflect dreams and doubts alike. A few girls were already warming up, their whispered conversations making a thin net of sound. As Lulu entered, a hush rippled through them, not complete silence, but a subtle tightening, as if each girl's attention had turned sharp. Vessa Norin stood near the mirror, adjusting the ribbon on her slipper with practiced grace. She lifted her head and looked Lulu over with the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. Lulu, Vessa said, drawing the name out as if testing its shape for weakness. You're early. Again. So are you, Lulu replied, even, polite. She placed her bag at her usual spot and began to change shoes without haste. Vessa's gaze flicked to Lulu's slippers. New ribbons, she asked, though her tone suggested accusation. Replaced, Lulu said. They were fraying. A girl beside Vessa, thin as a reed and just as easily bent into agreement, tittered. Of course. It must be nice to have a personal shoemaker. Lulu tied her ribbons with steady hands. She had learned that reacting was what they wanted. A sharp word, a flushed face, a stumble in composure. She would give them none of it. Their shoes, Lulu said. They wear out. Vessa sighed as if Lulu had disappointed her with simplicity. Well, do be careful. The festival performance is delicate. Wouldn't want any mishaps. Lulu's eyes met hers in the mirror. I don't plan on having any. For the first time Vessa's smile thinned, and Lulu took a quiet satisfaction in it. Not triumph. Just a reminder to herself that she was not helpless. Madam Celinne entered like a cut of silk. She wore a dark dress with a high collar and a shawl pinned at her shoulder. Her hair was swept into a smooth knot. She did not need to raise her voice to command a room, she simply stood, and everyone remembered their posture. Positions, Madam Celinne said, and the word fell crisp as a clap. The girls lined up. Lulu took her place, spine long, chin level, eyes forward. She could feel the other dancers' attention at her back like a draft under a door. Warm-ups began, plies, tendus, controlled rises. The familiar aches in Lulu's calves woke like loyal companions. She sank into the work, letting the counts guide her. In, out, turn, hold, release. The studio's noise narrowed into the clean language of movement. Yet even in that language, she felt eyes. When Madam Celinne called for centre work, Lulu's pulse quickened. This was the day the final casting for the spiral of lanterns would be confirmed. Everyone knew it. Everyone pretended not to. Madam Celinne's gaze swept the line. "We will rehearse the festival sequence," she said. "Full measure. No indulgence. No shortcuts." A flutter of nerves moved through the group. Madam Celinne's eyes landed on Lulu. "Ludka. Center." Lulu stepped forward. The music began, simple at first, a counted rhythm tapped out by the accompanist on a small hand drum. Lulu raised her arms, feeling the air settle around her. Dance was not just steps. It was intention made visible. It was breath turned into shape. She began. Her first turn was clean as a bell. The second drew a slight shift in the room, as if people leaned without meaning to. Lulu's feet found the floor's truth. Her body remembered every correction Madam Celinne had ever given, every bruise and blister earned in pursuit of exactness. In the mirror, Lulu saw Vesa watching. Not with admiration. With calculation. Lulu ignored it. She could not afford anything else. As the sequence reached its lantern spiral, Lulu let herself imagine the festival stage, lanternlight above, the village watching, the visiting patrons seated in polished rows. She imagined the hush, the expectancy. She imagined the moment her body would speak, and the whole valley would understand what it meant to seek harmony. When the final step landed, the drumbeat stopped. Silence filled the studio, thick as snow. Madam Celinne's expression remained composed, but Lulu had learned to read her teacher's smallest shifts. The slight lift of the chin. The faint narrowing of the eyes. Approval, carefully rationed. "Again," Madam Celinne said. Lulu swallowed and nodded. "Again." The girls rotated through their turns at center, each offering their version of the same sequence. Some were lovely. Some were brittle. Some, like Vesa's, were technically perfect and emotionally empty, as if she were performing for a mirror rather than a room. When Vesa finished, she glanced at Madam Celinne with the subtle question all dancers asked, "Was it enough?" Madam Celinne said nothing. At the end of class, she dismissed the group with a sharp nod. "Remain," she told Lulu, and Lulu's stomach dipped. The others filed out, their whispers rising the moment Madam Celinne's attention shifted away. Lulu kept her face neutral. She gathered her bag. She waited. When the studio was empty except for the three of them, Lulu, Madam Celinne, and the accompanist packing away his drum, Madam Celinne approached. "Your control has improved," Madam Celinne said. "Your lines are clean. Your timing is exact." Lulu held her breath, waiting for the knife. Madam Celinne always offered praise like a surgeon, precise, then followed by incision. "And your expression," Madam Celinne continued, "has finally stopped apologizing for itself." Lulu blinked. Heat rose behind her eyes, sudden and unwelcome. She forced it down. "Thank you, madam." Madam Celinne studied her. "Do you want the principal role?" "Yes," Lulu said. It came out more fiercely than she intended, and her cheeks warmed. She steadied. "Yes. I do." "Why?" "Because I need something that is mine. Because I want the village to see me as more than a joke of a name. Because when I dance, the world makes sense." Lulu chose the truest answer she could speak aloud. "Because I can do it," she said. "And because I want to." Madam Celinne nodded once, as if that was the proper amount of wanting. "You will have it," she said. Lulu stared, not quite believing. "Madam." "The spiral of lanterns will be yours," Madam Celinne said, and the words fell like a mantle. "Do not let it make you timid. Do not let it make you arrogant. Let it make you responsible." Lulu's throat tightened. "I won't waste it." "I know," Madam Celinne said, and for a moment her voice softened. "But know this, the festival draws more than villagers. Patrons. Lords. Eyes that are not used to hearing no." A chill threaded through Lulu that had nothing to do with winter. "What do you mean?" Madam Celinne's gaze slid toward the high windows, as if she could see the border beyond the valley's rim. "Only that you must keep your will close," she said. Talent invites attention. Attention invites appetite. Lulu's hands tightened on her bag strap. I'm not afraid of attention. Madam Celinne's mouth curved, faint and unreadable. Everyone says that, she murmured. Until they learn the difference between admiration and wanting. When Lulu left the academy, the sun was higher and the frost had begun to soften. She walked down Lantern Row with her principal role buzzing in her blood, a bright thread pulled tight inside her chest. She should have run home and told her parents. The thought made her joy falter. Telling them would become a contest: who praised her first, who warned her louder, who claimed they'd always supported her most. Their pride would turn into another form of argument. Instead, Lulu found herself drifting toward the cobbler's shop. Andre was bent over a workbench when she stepped inside, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a strip of leather clamped beneath a knife. He looked up as the bell over the door chimed. Well, he asked, and tried to sound casual, and failed. Lulu's smile lifted without her permission. I got it, she said. Andre's face lit like someone had struck a match behind his eyes. He set his knife down carefully, as if he didn't trust his hands to keep holding sharp things. You did. I did, Lulu repeated, and the words tasted like sweet bread. He came around the bench, wiping his hands on a cloth. For a moment he looked like he wanted to do something: hug her, take her hands, spin her like a dance. He stopped himself at the last inch, as he always did, respectful of the space Lulu guarded. That's wonderful, he said, and his voice went a little rough. They'll see you. Lulu's joy wavered again, pierced by Madam Celinne's warning. Eyes that are not used to hearing no. Andre noticed the shift. His brows drew together slightly. What is it? It's nothing, Lulu said quickly, then sighed because Andre always deserved the truth, or at least the nearest safe version. Madam Celinne said the festival draws important people. Patrons. Lords. That I should be careful. Andre's expression tightened. Not with jealousy. With concern. She's right, he said. Not because you can't handle yourself. Because people sometimes mistake beauty for permission. Lulu swallowed. She hated how true it sounded. I'm not going to let anyone decide things for me, she said, but she heard the thinness in her own certainty. Andre nodded slowly. Good, he said. Then, quieter, and if anyone tries, they'll learn they chose the wrong girl. Lulu looked at him. You make it sound like I'm dangerous. Andre's mouth twitched. I've seen you rehearse the lantern spiral, he said. I wouldn't challenge you to a fight in a narrow hallway. Lulu laughed, real laughter, full and startled, and the tightness eased. She leaned her hip against the counter, letting herself be here, in a place where words didn't have to become weapons. Andre lifted one of her slippers from the bag with care, inspecting the toe and ribbon. His fingers were steady, gentle. These will need stronger stitching before the festival, he said, practical as ever. You'll be on that stage for a long time. Can you do it? Lulu asked. Andre looked up. Of course I can. Lulu hesitated, then asked the question that had been sitting on her tongue since morning. Do you ever think about getting married? Andre froze so subtly she might have missed it if she didn't know him so well. His fingers paused on the ribbon. The air seemed to hold still. Lulu immediately regretted it. Not like that, she said quickly. Everyone's talking about the festival. And the lords. And it made me think about the way people expect things. Andre's gaze softened, and the tension in his shoulders eased just enough. I think about it sometimes, he admitted, careful. Not in the way people mean when they talk loud about it. More like, what kind of home I'd want. Lulu's chest felt strange. What kind? Andre's mouth curved faintly, but his eyes were serious. Quiet, he said. Not empty. Just peaceful. A place where you can disagree without it becoming a war. Lulu stared at him, unable to look away. The words struck something in her, an ache, but not a painful one. A longing she'd always dismissed as foolish. Andre's fingers returned to the slipper ribbon as if it were suddenly the safest place for his attention to rest. Why do you ask? Lulu swallowed and looked down at her hands. Because I don't want what my parents have, she said softly. And sometimes I think that means I don't want anything at all. Silence settled between them, gentle rather than heavy. Andre set the slipper down with care, as if it were fragile. You're allowed to want something good, he said. Lulu's throat tightened again, the way it had in the studio, but this time the feeling wasn't sharp. It was tender. Before she could answer, the bell over the door chimed again. A customer stepped in, a woman with a basket and cold cheeks, breaking the moment like a twig snapping underfoot. Andre straightened and offered his polite shop smile. Lulu stepped back, gathering her bag, her heart still unsettled by what had almost been spoken. I'll leave them with you, she said, nodding toward her slippers. For the stronger stitching. Andre's eyes flicked to her, warm and steady. I'll make them ready, he promised. Lulu turned to go, but paused in the doorway. The street beyond was bright with winter sun. Lantern hooks waited, empty. Andre, she said, without looking back. Yes. I'm glad you're my friend, Lulu said, and the words were safer than what she felt, but still true. There was a beat of silence, and then Andre's voice, low and careful, I'm glad too. Lulu stepped out into the village, her principal role shimmering in her chest like a lit lantern. She walked toward home with lighter steps than she'd had that morning, unaware that somewhere beyond Brindlewick's valley rim, the border between worlds listened to rhythm and breath, and that the coming festival would draw eyes that did not blink the way human eyes did. The days that followed Lulu's casting took on a strange double shape, bright on the outside, tight on the inside. Brindlewick moved toward the Luminant Festival the way a river moves toward a bend, inevitable, gathering speed. Lantern frames appeared on doorsteps like metal skeletons waiting for skin. Strips of colored paper fluttered from windows. Children ran errands with hands stained from dye and sugar, laughing as if joy could be manufactured on command. Even the air seemed different, fuller with smoke from hearths and the sweet yeast breath of bakeries preparing for crowds. At Madam Celinne's academy, the mood sharpened. Lulu arrived before the sun most mornings and left after it had slipped behind the valley ridge. She practiced until her muscles hummed and her joints felt like carefully fitted hinges. The spiral of lanterns lived in her bones now, every turn, every reach, every measured pause meant to look effortless while demanding everything. She liked the work. She trusted the work. Movement never lied to her. People did. When Lulu entered the studio, conversations thinned. When she took her spot at the bar, girls shifted as if her presence took up more air than it should. Vesanorin's clique grew bolder, not in open cruelty, Madam Celinne would have cut that off like a rotten thread, but in small, deniable acts that left Lulu constantly checking her surroundings. A ribbon left damp so it would fray faster. A rosin pouch gone missing. A costume sketch misplaced, forcing Lulu to repeat fittings. Nothing that could be proved. Everything that could be exhausting. Lulu kept her face calm and her mouth closed. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her strain. Still, she began to feel as if she were dancing with an invisible weight strapped to her ribs. One evening, after rehearsal ran long and Madam Celinne dismissed them with a clipped warning about lazy feet, Lulu found her practice skirt missing from the peg where she'd left it. She stood in the dressing corridor staring at the empty hook, heat creeping up her neck. The corridor smelled of powder and hairpins. The lamps along the wall flickered softly, their flames steady in glass. Behind her, giggles rose, quickly muffled. She didn't turn. If she turned, she would have to look at their faces, and she might not be able to keep her composure. She gathered her things in silence and left the academy wearing her plain day dress, fingers clenched tight around her bag strap. Outside, the sky was already darkening. Brindlewick's streets glowed with early lantern tests, small points of light hung from hooks, swaying faintly. The river's voice carried on the wind. Lulu walked faster than she meant to, boots biting the ground. When she reached Lantern Row, the cobbler's shop was still lit, warm light spilling from the window. She hesitated. She shouldn't. Andre had work. She had pride. But she pushed the door open anyway. The bell chimed, bright as a note. Andre looked up from his bench. His sleeves were rolled, forearms dusted with leather shavings. He had a strip of lace between his teeth and a needle in his hand. He pulled the lace out with a quick grin. "Lulu," he said. "You're late." Lulu's mouth twitched. I'm not late. The day is just long. Andre's gaze flicked over her face, catching something she hadn't managed to hide. He set his work down carefully, as if he didn't want any sharp objects near her mood. What happened? He asked. Nothing, Lulu lied automatically. Andre waited. He didn't press. He simply stood there, present, like a door held open without being shoved. Lulu exhaled. My skirt is gone, she admitted, hating how small her voice sounded. Not my good one. My practice one. But I left it on the peg and she lifted a hand, palm up, the gesture for vanished. Gone. Andre's expression tightened. Someone took it. They didn't take it, Lulu said, bitter. They stole it. Andre's jaw worked as if he were chewing on a word. Do you know who? Lulu looked away at the shelves of boots. It doesn't matter. If I accuse anyone, I'll look childish, petty, dramatic. Exactly what Vesa wanted. It matters, Andre said quietly. Not because you need to start a war in the dressing corridor. Because you shouldn't have to carry it alone. Lulu's throat tightened. She stared hard at a row of polished shoes until her eyes stopped stinging. I'm fine. Andre didn't argue. He moved around the counter and opened a small cabinet. He pulled out a folded bundle of cloth and held it up. I was going to save this for closer to the festival, he said, but, here. He unfolded it. A practice skirt, dark, sturdy, simple, hung from his hands. Lulu blinked. What is that? A skirt, Andre said, as if it were obvious. I asked Tomlin Kerr's wife to sew it. She owes me a favor because I fixed her winter boots for half what they were worth. It has deep stitches. It won't tear easily. And if someone tries to steal it, it'll snag on their guilt. Despite herself, Lulu let out a laugh that sounded suspiciously like relief. You did this for me, she asked, and the question felt foolish the moment it left her mouth. Andre did things. Quietly. Constantly. That was his way. Andre's ears turned faintly pink. You're on your feet all day, he said, avoiding her eyes as he fussed with the waistband. You shouldn't have to worry about whether your clothing is going to survive someone else's nonsense. Lulu reached out and touched the fabric. It was heavy enough to swing well, but not so heavy it would drag. Practical. Thoughtful. Like him. A warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the shop's heat. Thank you, she whispered. Andre looked up then, and for a moment the air between them shifted like a step about to turn into something else. His gaze held hers, steady and earnest. You don't have to thank me like I'm a stranger, he said softly. I'm your friend. Lulu nodded quickly, because her eyes felt dangerous again. Yes. I know. Andre cleared his throat and stepped back, returning to the safe ground of work. Your festival slippers are almost done, he said, turning toward the bench. I'm reinforcing the toe and putting in a new inner stitch. Madam Celinne will approve. Lulu's heart steadied on that familiar rhythm. He fixed what broke. She lingered a moment, watching him work, the way his hands moved with confidence, the way his brow furrowed when he concentrated. It was oddly comforting, like watching someone stitch order into the world. Madam Celinne warned me, Lulu said, the words slipping out before she could weigh them. About attention. Andre's needle paused. What kind of warning? She said the festival draws. Eyes that aren't used to hearing no, Lulu said, trying to make it sound like nothing. I told you. Andre's gaze sharpened. And it bothered you more than you wanted to admit. Lulu's mouth tightened. Everyone expects things from the principal dancer. Smiles. Gratitude. Charm. Like I'm supposed to be, a prize, a decoration, a pleasant story to be consumed. Andre's voice went quiet. You're supposed to be yourself. Lulu laughed under her breath. People don't always like that. Then that's their problem, Andre said, and the firmness in him startled her. Not anger. Not bluster. Something steadier. A line drawn. Lulu stared at him. You make it sound easy. Andre's shoulders rose and fell in a small shrug. It's not easy, he admitted. But it's clear. Clear. Lulu envied that. She left the shop with the new skirt folded in her bag and her festival slippers promised soon. The street felt less sharp. The lantern hooks above the road looked less like waiting mouths. At home, the storm was already brewing. Her father and mother were in the front room, voices raised. Something about the placement of lantern frames. Something about whether the door needed repainting before the festival. Lulu paused in the entryway, listening, exhaustion pressing against her temples. "Why do you always have to contradict me?" her father demanded. "Why do you always have to be right?" her mother snapped back. Lulu could have walked in and tried to soothe them. She'd done it often enough. She'd played peacekeeper until her own patience frayed. But tonight she felt the edge of Madam Celinne's warning, Andre's quiet steadiness, the Academy's sharp smiles, the weight of being watched. She couldn't hold their storm too. Lulu slipped past the room and into her small bedroom at the back of the house. She shut the door and leaned against it, breathing hard as if she'd run. On her bed, she spread out the new skirt Andre had given her. The stitches were tight and even. The fabric smelled faintly of soap and wool. It was such a small thing. A skirt. And yet it felt like proof that someone in her world could see her without wanting to pull her apart. Lulu pressed a hand against the cloth and let her eyes close for a moment. In the days that followed, the Academy tightened its grip on time. Madam Celinne demanded perfection with a cold devotion. The spiral of lanterns became not just dance but ritual. Each rehearsal began with the same counts, the same alignment of feet and breath. Lulu began to sense how the studio itself responded to rhythm. When the girls moved together in true measure, the air seemed smoother, the mirrors clearer. When someone's timing slipped, the room felt rough, as if the floor resisted them. It wasn't magic in the way stories told it, no sparks, no glowing hands. But it was something. Sometimes, as Lulu held a pose and felt the pulse of the room, she wondered if dance was older than language. Older than any rule her parents had ever argued about. The festival crept closer. Brindlewick filled with visitors from neighboring hamlets. Traders set up stalls along the river. A delegation from the Hill estate arrived, minor nobility with fine cloaks and polished boots, sent to honor the village's lantern tradition. People whispered that more lords were expected this year than ever before. Madam Celinne's warning repeated in Lulu's mind like a count she couldn't shake. Eyes that are not used to hearing no. The night before the festival's final performance, Lulu stood alone in the studio after rehearsal. The other girls had gone, their laughter echoing down the stairwell. The lamps were dimmed. The mirrors reflected only her, pale and tired, hair slipping from its pins. She practiced the opening sequence once, slow and controlled. Then again, faster, more true. She moved until her breath steadied and her fear settled into the right place, present, but not in control. When she finished, she stood with her hands on her hips, staring at her own reflection. "You can do this," she whispered. Not to the mirror. To the frightened part of herself that still believed attention was a trap. The bell at the Academy door chimed faintly downstairs, someone entering the building late. Lulu frowned. Madam Celinne had left. The staff was gone. Footsteps sounded on the stair. Lulu's heart tightened. She turned toward the studio door, shoulders lifting as if to guard her throat. The door opened. Andre stood there, hat in hand, cheeks flushed from the cold. He looked oddly out of place in the Academy's quiet elegance, like a warm, practical object placed in a room of polished glass. "Lulu," he said softly. "I'm sorry. I know it's late. Madam Celinne let me in." Lulu blinked. "Why are you here?" Andre stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He looked around the empty studio, then back at her, as if measuring his words. "I finished the festival slippers," he said, holding up a wrapped bundle. "And I didn't want to give them to you tomorrow in the crowd. Not with everyone watching." Lulu's throat tightened. She walked toward him, the boards quiet under her feet. Andre unwrapped the cloth. The slippers inside were pale satin, but reinforced, stitches hidden so neatly they looked like part of the original design. The ribbons were new, strong, and soft against her fingers. "They're perfect," Lulu breathed. Andre's gaze stayed on her face, not the shoes. "They'll hold," he said. "Even if you dance like you're trying to carve the air." Lulu's lips twitched. "I don't do that." Andre's eyes warmed. You do. Lulu looked down, suddenly shy. Thank you, she said again, and hated that the words felt inadequate. Andre shifted, as if fighting the urge to move closer. Tomorrow, he said, voice quiet, there will be a lot of people. Yes, Lulu said. A lot of important people, Andre continued, the words weighted now. Lulu's fingers curled around the slippers. Yes. Andre's jaw tightened. If anyone speaks to you in a way that makes you uncomfortable, he said carefully, you don't owe them politeness. Lulu looked up sharply. That's not how things work. It is, Andre said, and the steadiness in him returned. Maybe not for them. But for you. You don't owe anyone your yes. The studio seemed to hold its breath. Lulu stared at him, startled by how fiercely she wanted to believe that. By how fiercely she wanted it to be true. My parents, she began, then stopped. The subject sat like a stone between her ribs. Andre's expression softened. I know, he said gently. You've seen what happens when people treat each other like opponents. Lulu swallowed. I don't want that, she whispered. Andre nodded once. Neither do I. For a moment, the distance between them felt both enormous and fragile. Lulu could feel something in the air that wasn't rhythm or rehearsal, a possibility. Andre opened his mouth, as if to say something more, something that might change the shape of their friendship forever. But footsteps echoed faintly from below, Madam Celinne returning, her pace precise even on stairs. Andre closed his mouth. The moment folded itself away like a ribbon tucked into a sleeve. He handed Lulu the slippers. Their fingers brushed, quick, accidental, and yet Lulu felt it all the way up her arm. Good night, Andre said softly. Good night, Lulu whispered. He left before Madam Celinne reached the studio, and Lulu stood alone again, slippers pressed to her chest like a promise she wasn't ready to name. The next day, Brindlewick bloomed. Lanterns hung from every hook. The river reflected light like a ribbon of coins. Stalls lined the square with spiced cider and sugared nuts and woven charms meant to bring luck. Musicians tuned instruments in the open air, the notes scattering like birds. Lulu spent the morning in the Academy's dressing room while Madam Celinne supervised every pin and fold. The other girls moved around her like a tide, tight smiles, murmured comments, hands a little too near Lulu's costume. Vessa approached as Lulu sat while her hair was fastened into a smooth knot, decorated with a small lantern-shaped comb. You look appropriate, Vessa said, the compliment shaped like a slight. Lulu met her eyes in the mirror. Thank you. Vessa's smile sharpened. Just remember, she murmured, leaning closer as if sharing a secret, if you embarrass the Academy in front of the visiting lords, Madam Celinne will not forgive you. Lulu's hands tightened in her lap. I'm not going to embarrass anyone, she said, calm. Least of all myself. Vessa drew back, her gaze cold for an instant before her sweetness returned. Of course, she said lightly. How could you? The performance space was set in the meadow near the river bend, Brindlewick's traditional stage for the festival dance. Lantern poles ringed the clearing, each one hung with layered paper lights. The audience gathered in rows, villagers in their best cloaks, merchants with bright scarves, and at the front, the visiting patrons, minor nobles with polished boots and jeweled rings. Madam Celinne lined the dancers up behind the stage screen. The music began beyond it, drums and strings, steady and bright. Lulu's heart beat hard, but her hands were steady as she adjusted her ribbons. Andre's stitches held firm under her fingers. You will be brilliant, Madam Celinne said quietly behind her, voice like a blade honed smooth. Do not look for approval. Do not look for mercy. Dance the measure. Lulu nodded. Yes, madam. The screen lifted. Lantern light spilled across the stage. The clearing beyond looked unreal, glowing and soft, as if someone had painted light into the air. The audience's faces were a blur of expectation. The first note sounded. Lulu stepped forward. Everything else fell away. The spiral of lanterns began with a simple lined dancers moving in clean formation, arms lifting as if raising light from the earth. Lulu's feet found the rhythm, breath syncing with drumbeat. She turned, and the world turned with her. When she reached the center, The lantern spiral sequence unfolded like a story she'd always known. The dancers circled, weaving light and shadow. Lulu's body became the axis around which the pattern held. In the front row, faces watched. Lulu kept her gaze soft, her focus inward, as Madam Celinne had taught her. And then, without meaning to, her eyes lifted. A man sat among the visiting lords, dressed in deep green with silver embroidery that caught the lantern light. His posture was elegant, too still, as if motion were something he allowed rather than something that happened to him. His hair was dark, his features sharp in a way that felt almost carved. He was smiling. Not the broad smile of a pleased audience member. Something narrower. Intent. Lulu's skin prickled. She nearly missed a count, caught herself at the last heartbeat, forcing her focus back to the dance. Her feet held. The pattern did not break. But the man's gaze stayed on her as if he were listening to her with his eyes. As the final note rang out and the dancers held their closing pose, applause erupted. Lantern light shook with the sound. Lulu lifted her chin, breathing hard, cheeks warm. She bowed with the others, then stepped back as the dancers cleared the stage. Behind the screen, the girls burst into excited whispers. Lulu's pulse hammered in her ears. She loosened her ribbons with trembling fingers. Madam Celinne's gaze fixed on Lulu. "Well done," she said, and for her, that was praise enough to fill a room. Lulu nodded, forcing herself to breathe. Then the curtain shifted again, and a servant in fine livery appeared, bowing toward Madam Celinne. "A lord wishes to congratulate your principal," he said politely. "Privately, if you please." Madam Celinne's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Which lord?" The servant hesitated, as if the name itself required care. "Lord Serrivane Thorneveyl." The name slid through Lulu like cold water. Madam Celinne's expression tightened. She looked at Lulu, and something unspoken passed between them: warning, calculation, the memory of her earlier words about appetite. "You may receive him," Madam Celinne said at last, voice controlled. "But you will not be alone." Before Lulu could protest, Madam Celinne moved to stand beside her, a quiet wall. The screen lifted enough for the Lord to approach behind the stage area, away from the crowd's eyes. Lord Serrivane stepped into the lantern-shadowed space as if he belonged there. The air seemed to shift around him, subtle and strange, like a change in pressure before rain. "Madam Celinne Quoire," he said, inclining his head. His voice was smooth, pleasant, measured, each syllable placed with care. "Your academy honors Brindlewick." Madam Celinne returned the nod without warmth. "My dancers work hard." Serrivane's gaze slid to Lulu, and Lulu fought the instinct to step backward. His eyes were dark, reflecting lantern light like wet stone. "You," Serrivane said softly, as if speaking to a rare object he'd found in a market stall. "You are luminous." Lulu's cheeks heated, but not with pleasure. "Thank you, my lord," she said automatically, the polite answer drilled into every village girl who might ever meet nobility. Serrivane's smile deepened. "No," he murmured. "Do not thank me for seeing what is true." Madam Celinne's voice cut in, cool and sharp. "If you came to congratulate, you have done so." Serrivane didn't look away from Lulu. "I came because such talent does not belong in a valley that cannot appreciate it," he said, as if Madam Celinne were not there at all. "You could dance in halls where every light is shaped to flatter you. Where your art is not used for village tradition, but honored as it deserves." Lulu's fingers curled at her sides. Something in his tone made her feel as if he were already making decisions on her behalf. "My lord," Lulu said, careful, "I am honored, but I am content here." Serrivane tilted his head. "Content," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "Is that what you call it? Living in a house of discord? Training in a studio full of envy? You are forced to earn scraps of peace. I can offer you peace in abundance." Lulu's stomach tightened. How did he know? She had never spoken to him. No one outside her closest circle should know anything about her home. Madam Celinne's posture went rigid. "You presume too much," she said. Serrivane finally glanced at Madam Celinne, smile untroubled. "I presume only what your dancer proves. She hungers for harmony." Lulu's throat felt dry. She found her voice by gripping it like a railing. I hunger for dance, she said firmly. And I choose where I do it. Serrivane's gaze returned to her. The lantern light around him seemed to brighten, as if bending toward his presence. Choose, he echoed, gentle as a lullaby. How charming, that you believe your choices are not already shaped by the world you were born into. Lulu's pulse spiked. She took a small step back, just one, and felt Madam Celinne shift closer, protective. My lord, Lulu said, the politeness cracking at the edges, I am not for sale. I am not a prize. And I will not leave Brindlewick. For a heartbeat, Serrivane's smile faltered. Then it returned, smoother, colder. I did not offer to buy you, he said softly. I offered to elevate you. Madam Celinne's voice sharpened. She has answered you. Serrivane's gaze stayed on Lulu with unsettling steadiness. You will tire of chaos, he murmured. When you do, you will remember that I offered you a door. Lulu forced her chin up. I will remember that I said no. Something flickered in Serrivane's eyes, something like surprise, quickly masked. He inclined his head, as if accepting a compliment. As you wish, he said, and the words sounded like agreement. But the air around him hummed faintly, a pressure Lulu could feel in her teeth. For an instant, the lanterns seemed to sway though there was no wind. Serrivane stepped backward, smooth as a retreating tide. Enjoy your applause, Lulu, he said, speaking her name as if he owned it. It is only a beginning. Then he turned and vanished back into the festival crowd, swallowed by light and noise. Lulu stood frozen for a moment, heart hammering. Madam Celinne's hand touched her elbow, light, firm. Do not wander, she said under her breath. Do not go near the river bend alone. Stay with the group. Lulu swallowed. Who is he? She whispered. Madam Celinne's eyes were hard. Trouble, she said. And not the human kind. The rest of the evening blurred. Lulu rejoined the dancers, smiling when required, accepting praise from villagers who had always known her as the odd-named girl who twirled away from arguments. People pressed warm hands into hers, offered sweets, laughed. Lulu laughed back. She nodded. She thanked them. But inside, her senses stayed sharp, searching the crowd for a flash of green and silver. She saw him again only once across the meadow, standing near a lantern pole. His posture was effortless, as if he needed no rest. He wasn't speaking to anyone, and yet a small space seemed to exist around him, as if people unconsciously avoided stepping too close. His eyes met Lulu's from across the distance. He lifted 2 fingers in a small, almost intimate salute. Lulu's skin prickled. She turned away, forcing herself to focus on the women around her, on the warm cider offered, on the music. When the festival began to thin and the villagers drifted home, Lulu stayed with the academy group as Madam Celinne insisted. They moved together in a tight cluster, lantern light bobbing above them. Near the river bend, the air felt colder. The water ran dark, reflecting the lanterns like fractured stars. Lulu kept her gaze forward, her steps measured. A voice spoke beside her, close enough that Lulu flinched. You danced like you were trying to escape, the voice murmured. Lulu's head snapped toward it. Lord Serrivane stood at the edge of the path, half in shadow, as if he had stepped out of the night itself. No footfalls. No warning. Just presence. Madam Celinne stiffened. My lord, she said sharply. Serrivane's gaze slid to Lulu. It is late, he said softly. The village is loud. Your home is louder. Lulu's mouth went dry. Leave us, she said, and hated how her voice trembled. Serrivane's smile was almost tender. I offered you a door, he said. You refused because you fear change. Because you fear love. Because you have mistaken suffering for safety. Lulu's hands clenched. You don't know me. Serrivane tilted his head. I know what your measure says, he murmured. Madam Celinne stepped forward, drawing herself up like a blade. You will not speak to my dancer again. Serrivane's eyes flicked to Madam Celinne with faint amusement. You cannot keep her, he said lightly. Not from what she is. The lanterns overhead flickered. The air thickened, humming with something Lulu could feel in her bones, like the beginning of music before the first audible note. Lulu's breath caught. Serrivane's voice dropped, soft as velvet. Come with me, he said. Willingly. Or. Lulu's fear flared into anger. No, she said, the word sharp as a snapped ribbon. No, no, no. Serrivane's smile didn't move. Then you will learn, he whispered, and lifted his hand. He did not touch her. He simply moved his fingers in a small pattern, 2 beats, a pause, a 3rd beat, and the world answered. The river's voice deepened. Lanternlight bent. Lulu felt her feet want to move, as if the ground beneath her was suddenly part of a dance she had not chosen. Her heart hammered. She fought it, digging her heels into the path. For an instant, she held. Then the air shifted again, stronger, and Lulu's balance faltered. A dizziness swept through her, as if her own body had turned against her. She grabbed at Madam Celinne's sleeve, but the fabric slipped through her fingers like smoke. Madam Celinne shouted something Lulu heard only fragments, as if sound itself had been dragged underwater. Serrivane's eyes held Lulu's, unwavering. Peace, he murmured, and the word landed like a command. Lulu tried to scream. No sound came. Her feet moved. Step, step, turn, hold. Not her spiral. His measure. The world narrowed to rhythm and lanternlight. Lulu stumbled forward as if pulled by an invisible thread. The river bend seemed to open, the darkness between lantern poles deepening into a doorway that shouldn't exist. Madam Celinne lunged, trying to grab Lulu's arm. Her fingers caught fabric and then slid away, as if Lulu were coated in oil. Lulu's chest burned. Panic clawed at her throat. Andre's words flashed through her mind, you don't owe anyone your yes. Lulu fought with everything she had, forcing her will into her feet. For one heartbeat, she managed to break the pattern. Her toe caught on a stone. Her knee buckled. She fell hard to the path, breath exploding from her lungs. The lanterns above shuddered, their light flaring. Serrivane's gaze sharpened, surprised. Lulu forced herself up on shaking hands. No, she rasped, voice barely a whisper. Serrivane stepped closer. His shadow swallowed her. Stubborn, he murmured, almost fond. Good. It will make you brighter when you finally yield. He shifted his fingers again, faster this time, more complex. Lulu felt the rhythm seize her ankles, her spine, her breath. Her muscles moved without her permission, and her own trained body betrayed her by following measure beautifully. Tears blurred her vision. She searched the path wildly for anyone, but the academy girls had scattered, shrieking, their lanterns swinging. Madam Celinne stood rigid, one hand lifted in a counterpattern Lulu couldn't read, face pale with rage and concentration. The air between Madam Celinne and Serrivane seemed to strain like rope under tension. But Serrivane's cadence was deeper. Lulu's feet stepped into the darkness between lantern poles. The world turned cold and sweet and wrong. The smell of river and smoke vanished, replaced by something like crushed flowers and winter air. A shimmer spread across her vision, like looking through heat above a fire. Lulu tried to inhale and tasted honey on her tongue. Her body moved through the doorway. For one terrible heartbeat, she looked back. Madam Celinne's face was lit by lantern fire, eyes fierce and helpless. Then the veil snapped shut like a closing eye, and Brindlewick vanished. Lulu stumbled onto ground that felt like polished stone beneath thin grass. The sky above was too clear, stars too sharp, as if someone had etched them with a needle. Trees rose around her, tall, silver-barked, leaves like dark glass. Lanterns hung from branches, glowing without flame. The air hummed with quiet, constant rhythm. Lulu's body sagged as the forced measure released her. She dropped to her knees, breath shaking. Serrivane stepped through the veil behind her as if walking through a curtain. His cloak did not stir. His boots did not pick up dirt. He looked down at Lulu with a calm that made her want to bite something. Welcome, he said softly, as if she were a guest. You will rest now. Lulu tried to scramble backward, but her limbs felt heavy, as if sleep had been poured into them. You drugged me, she whispered, voice thick. Serrivane crouched, bringing his face level with hers. His eyes were very dark. No, he said gently. I simply quieted the part of you that thrashes. That part is me, Lulu breathed, fury and fear tangling. Serrivane's smile was small. You will thank me when you remember what peace feels like. He lifted his hand and, without touching her skin, traced a slow circle in the air. Lulu felt the motion like a lullaby pressing against her eyelids. Her head dipped. She fought, but her body was a tired thing and the cadence was deep. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was lantern light reflecting in Serrivane's eyes like captured stars. Back in Brindlewick, the river bend rang with screams. Madam Celinne's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Find Andre von Marell, she barked at Orla Ven, who had come running from the square with her shawl flapping like a banner. Now. Orla's face was pale, but her eyes were fierce. I'm going, she snapped, already turning. By all the old mercies, I'm going. She ran through the lantern-lit streets, skirts lifted, feet pounding frozen ground. She reached the cobbler's shop and slammed her palm against the door. Andre, she shouted. Open up, boy. It's Lulu, she's gone. Inside, leather and lamplight. Andre jerked his head up from his bench as if struck. The bell chimed as Orla shoved the door open. What do you mean, gone? Andre demanded, already moving, hands empty because his tools had suddenly become useless. Orla grabbed his sleeve. Her grip was iron. Taken, she hissed. At the river bend. A lord, no, not a lord. Not human. Madam Celinne says, Orla swallowed hard. Faye. Andre's face drained of color. For a heartbeat he looked like a boy again, all the steadiness knocked loose. Then something in him locked into place. He pulled on his coat with one sharp motion, as if dressing for war. Where? He said. Orla didn't answer with words. She dragged him into the night. Andre did not remember crossing Lantern Row. He remembered Orla Ven's fingers clamped around his sleeve like a shackle, her breath coming hard through her teeth as she pulled him past lanterns that suddenly looked wrong, too bright, too cheerful, too ignorant of what had been taken. He remembered the cold bite of air in his lungs and the thud of his own pulse in his ears. He remembered the river bend. Brindlewick's water ran dark under the lantern poles, and the path beside it was scuffed with frantic footprints. One lantern lay on its side, paper torn, its light spilling sideways across the grass like something wounded. Madam Celinne stood at the edge of the clearing, still as carved stone, her shawl thrown back and one hand lifted as if she were holding an invisible line in the air. The academy girls huddled in a knot farther up the path, crying into each other's sleeves. Lulu's parents had arrived too, Bramwell Ludka's face red with fury and fear, Muriel Ludka's mouth trembling as she tried to speak and could not. Andre's eyes went straight to the place where the darkness had been. Nothing. Just lantern light and river mist and cold air. His stomach dropped as if the ground had vanished under him. Where? He asked, voice rough. He sounded older than he was. Madam Celinne looked at him, and her gaze had no softness left in it, only precision. Here, she said, pointing to the space between two lantern poles where the grass looked slightly flattened, as if something had slid through it. And not here. Andre stared, trying to see what she meant. The night was ordinary. The night was a lie. Orla shoved a lantern upright with her foot, as if the small act of writing something could keep the world from tilting further. He took her like she was a ribbon, she spat. Like she was nothing. She was not nothing, Andre said, too fiercely. Muriel made a broken sound. She said she was practicing, she whispered, as if the word should have protected Lulu. She said. Bramwell's voice cracked like a whip. Who? He demanded. Who took my daughter? Madam Celinne's jaw tightened. Lord Serrivane Thorneveyl, she said. And that is not his true name, but it is what he wears among humans. Bramwell took a step forward as if he might strike the air itself. Then we fetch the constable. No, Madam Celinne snapped, and the single syllable cut through Bramwell's fury like a knife. You fetch no one who will bumble into the border and die because they believe iron and shouting can solve what was done. Bramwell's hands clenched. So we do nothing. Madam Celinne's gaze stayed on Andre. We do something that works. Andre swallowed hard. His mouth tasted like leather dust and panic. Tell me, he said. Tell me what to do. Orla released his sleeve and shoved her hand into her shawl, pulling out a small pouch tied with twine. She tossed it to Andre. He caught it instinctively. Salt, she said. Old salt. I keep it for births and burials and things that like to pretend they're neither. You'll want it. Andre stared at the pouch as if it might explain itself. Why me? He asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. It was not humility. It was terror. He had never imagined himself the sort of man who walked into other worlds. Orla's eyes were sharp. Because you're the only one in this village who knows how to make something hold, she said, jerking her chin toward his hands. And because you're the only one Lulu trusts enough that she might follow you even when she's scared. Andre's throat tightened. He looked past Orla to Mirel and Bramwell. Mirel's eyes were wet and wide, pleading. Bramwell's pride warred with gratitude he didn't know how to show. Madam Celinne stepped closer. The lanternlight carved shadows into the lines of her face, making her look older, more dangerous. Listen carefully, she said. What was done was cadence-craft. A measure laid over her body, like a pattern forced into cloth. He used the border's thinness, festival rhythm, lanternlight, river bend. He planned it. Andre's chest felt too tight. Can you open it? He demanded. Madam Celinne's gaze flicked to the dark space again. Not by force, she said. And not while the festival is still humming through the village. The border is sensitive when Brindlewick sings. Orla snorted. And by sings she means drums and dancing and fools calling it tradition. Madam Celinne ignored her. I can show you where the veil remembers how to part, she said. But you must understand the first rule. You cannot cross in anger alone. You must cross in measure. Andre blinked. Measure, he repeated, and the word made him think of Lulu's feet, of counted breath, of his own hands stitching in even lines. Intent, Madam Celinne said, tapping her fingers against her palm as if counting. Measure. Token. Without all three, you will not enter Fey lands. Or you will enter and never return. Andre's tongue felt thick. What token? Madam Celinne looked toward Orla. Orla lifted her chin. Salt is one. Leather is another, if it's worked with honest hands, she said. And you, shoeboy, you've got leather in your blood. Andre's mind raced. My tools, he said. My all. My needle. My. Not your entire shop, Orla snapped. Just what matters. Madam Celinne's gaze remained fixed on Andre. The cost is not small, she said. Cadence craft always takes payment. You will be tired. You may lose pieces of memory if you push too far. Fey glamour will tempt you with what you want most. If you cannot hold your intent steady, you will be shaped by their rhythm instead of your own. Andre's hands trembled slightly. He curled them into fists, forcing stillness. My intent is Lulu, he said. Bring her home. Madam Celinne nodded once. Good. Now we craft the measure that will carry you. They did not go back to the academy. There was no time for mirrors and polish. Madam Celinne led Andre and Orla through narrow lanes and between back gardens where frost clung to cabbage leaves. They cut behind the bakery where warm bread scent made Andre's stomach twist painfully. Lulu had always liked the smell. He hated the way his mind grabbed at small memories, as if trying to hoard them against whatever might be taken later. They reached an old footpath beyond the last cottages, where the river narrowed and the stones along its edge were smooth as if countless feet had polished them. The lanterns did not reach here. Only starlight and the thin glow of festival fires in the distance. Madam Celinne stopped beside a willow whose branches dragged the water like tired fingers. Here, she said. Not at the bend. Here. The willow remembers. Orla pulled her shawl tighter. I hate this place, she muttered. Andre swallowed. The air felt different, sweet and cold at once, like the moment before snow. He could hear the river, but underneath it there was another sound, a low, steady hum that wasn't water. Madam Celinne crouched and drew a line in the damp earth with the tip of her finger. It was not a symbol Andre recognized, more like a path, a curve, a spiral that ended in a sharp hook. This is the count, she said. Your feet must follow it. Not exactly in space, exactly in timing. 4 beats, then 3, then a pause. Then a turn on the 5th breath. You will feel foolish. Do it anyway. Andre stared. I've never danced, he said, and hated how weak it sounded. Orla snorted. Everyone dances, she said. Some just do it with their hands. Madam Celinne stood. Then dance with your hands, she said, and to Andre's shock she gestured toward his coat. Your needle. Take it. Andre fumbled into his pocket and pulled out his leatherworking needle, thick, sturdy, the kind that could bite through stiff hide. The familiar weight steadied him a fraction. Madam Celinne nodded. You will stitch your measure into your token, she said. A line of thread in counted pulls. Each pull a beat. Each knot a vow. Leather remembers honest work. Andre's mind clicked. Thread. Beat. Count. The same way Lulu counted turns, the same way he counted stitches. It was not his world, but it touched it. Orla handed him a strip of leather from her pocket, old, dark, worn smooth. From my birthing satchel, she said gruffly. It's seen blood and life. It will hold better than your pretty scraps. Andre took it with both hands, reverent despite himself. He threaded his needle with waxed cord and, under Madam Celinne's watchful eye, began to stitch. 1 pull, 2, 3, 4. Pause. 3 pulls. Pause. A knot, tight as a clenched jaw. He stitched the pattern into the leather strip with meticulous focus, counting under his breath. The world narrowed to needle and thread, the same comfort he always found in making something that could be relied upon. When he finished, the strip held a simple line of stitching that looked ordinary to any human eye. But when Andre pressed his thumb over it, he felt a faint resistance, like a rhythm under the surface. Madam Celinne's gaze sharpened. Good, she said. Now the token must be sealed. Orla took the salt pouch and sprinkled a thin line over the stitched leather. Then she pressed her palm over it and whispered something under her breath, words Andre couldn't make out, not quite prayer, not quite curse. Madam Celinne lifted her hand and began to tap her fingers against her wrist, setting a slow, steady beat. Now, she said to Andre. Step. Andre's heart thudded. He looked at the river, at the willow, at the dark air that seemed to listen. He wanted to run. He wanted to vomit. He wanted Lulu safe in Brindlewick with her ridiculous name and her quiet laughter. He stepped. He did not know how to dance, not with grace. But he knew how to keep time. He matched his breath to Madam Celinne's fingerbeat, moved his feet in the count she had drawn. 4, 3, pause, turn on the 5th breath. On the turn, the air shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No lightning. No roar. Just a soft pressure, as if the world had leaned closer to see what he was doing. The river's hum deepened. Andre's skin prickled. The stitched leather in his palm felt warm. Again, Madam Celinne said, her voice tight. Andre repeated the measure. This time, when he paused, the starlight seemed to smear, as if the sky were being dragged sideways. The willow's branches trembled though there was no wind. Orla sucked in a breath. There, she whispered. Andre's mouth went dry. In front of him, the air between 2 willow branches looked darker than the darkness around it. Not shadow. Not absence of light. A depth, like looking into a well. Madam Celinne's gaze pinned him. Do not hesitate, she said. Hesitation is a question. The border answers questions with bargains. Andre's fingers tightened around the leather token. He nodded once, because if he opened his mouth he might say something that sounded like fear. He stepped into the well dark. Cold swept over him, sharp, sweet, wrong. His stomach lurched. For a heartbeat he felt as if his bones were being rearranged, as if the world had grabbed him by the spine and pulled. He clung to his count. 4, 3, pause, turn. On the turn, the cold eased. Andre stumbled forward onto ground that looked like grass but felt like polished stone under a thin skin. He bent at the waist, breathing hard, fighting nausea. The air smelled of crushed flowers and distant frost. Behind him, the darkness between willow branches quivered. Madam Celinne stood on the Brindlewick side, her face pale but composed. Orla hovered at her shoulder like a wary crow. Remember, Madam Celinne called softly, careful not to raise her voice as if volume could be taken as invitation. No bargains. No names. No promises you do not understand. Hold your intent like a blade. Orla's eyes flashed. And if some pretty thing offers you comfort, she barked, spit in its hand and keep walking. Andre managed a weak nod. He pressed his palm against the stitched leather token as if it were a talisman. Then the veil closed with a soft, final hush. Andre straightened slowly. The sky above him was too sharp. Stars pricked the dark like needles. Lanterns hung from branches of silver-barked trees, glowing without flame. The hum beneath everything was constant, a rhythm so steady it made his teeth ache. He swallowed, tasting honey on his tongue, and fought the sudden, disorienting urge to smile. The Fey lands were beautiful. That was the first danger. Andre forced himself to look away from the lanterns and focus on what mattered. Lulu. Bring her home. He took out his compass out of habit, then realized it was useless, its needle spun lazily as if amused. He shoved it back into his coat with a grim exhale. He moved forward, boots careful on the strange ground. The trees seemed to watch him. Not with eyes. With attention. As he walked, the air brushed his skin like soft fingers. He heard faint music somewhere, distant strings plucking a pattern that echoed the hum beneath the world. It pulled at his mind, trying to make his thoughts drift into it. Andre tightened his grip on his intent. Lulu's face. Lulu's laugh. Lulu's anger at being treated like an object. He walked for what felt like an hour and like a minute. Time did not behave. Finally, through the trees, he saw a road, pale stone, too smooth, winding like a ribbon. It led toward an estate that rose from the landscape like a dream built by someone who had never needed to consider practicality. Towering arches, balconies edged with silver filigree, windows glowing with warm light. Lanterns floated around it like fireflies held in place. Andre's stomach clenched. He didn't know how he knew, but he knew. This was Serrivane's place. He waited among the trees, watching. Servants moved in and out of the estate's side entrances, small figures in muted colors, carrying trays, sweeping steps, tending lanterns. They walked with a careful quickness that reminded Andre unpleasantly of Brindlewick's villagers around visiting lords, eager to please, afraid to offend. A pair of guards stood near the main gate. They did not look human, though they wore human shapes. Their eyes reflected lantern light strangely, and their posture was too perfect, too still. Andre could not fight his way through. He could not shout Lulu's name and demand his dancer back. He could not be a hero in the way Brindlewick's stories liked to pretend heroes were. He could be what he was, a craftsman. Andre took a breath and stepped onto the road. He walked toward the estate's side entrance with the measured calm he used when approaching a customer who might argue about price. His hands did not tremble. His face did not plead. He held himself as if he belonged, because in Fey lands, looking uncertain was an invitation to be shaped. A servant at the side door glanced up sharply as Andre approached. The servant's face was young, too smooth, eyes bright as polished glass. He looked Andre over with quick assessment. "State your craft," the servant said. His voice was light, almost musical, but there was an edge under it. Andre's throat tightened. Aula's warning flickered. No bargains, no names. "I mend shoes," Andre said simply. "I mend what keeps feet true." The servant's gaze flicked to Andre's boots, then to his hands. "Human," he said with mild disdain, as if tasting the word. Andre kept his voice steady. "Humans wear shoes," he said. "Even here." A pause. The servant's head tilted. "What do you want?" "To tear your lord's world apart from the inside," Andre thought. "I heard this house values performance," Andre said, careful. "And performers ruin shoes faster than anyone. I can be useful." The servant's eyes narrowed. "Who sent you?" "No one," Andre said, which was true enough. "I came because my work deserves a better patron than a village of muddy lanes." The words made his stomach churn. He hated hearing himself sound like he was seeking advancement. But he could not say, "I am here to steal back the girl you stole." He needed a story that fit the shape of Fey expectations. The servant studied him for a long moment, then gestured sharply. "Show me," he said. Andre followed him inside. The estate smelled like polished wood and floral smoke. Everything gleamed. Floors so smooth they reflected lantern light like water. Walls hung with tapestries depicting dances, figures frozen mid-turn, faces hidden behind masks of gold and silver. Andre's skin prickled. Masks. Madam Celinne's earlier warning about things that didn't like hearing no felt suddenly too small. The servant led him to a small workroom near the servants' corridor, less polished, filled with practical clutter. A bench, a stool, a rack of shoes needing repair. Andre's heart stuttered. So much of it looked familiar. Thread. Leather. Tools. Even in a house built like a dream, feet still needed support. Fix those, the servant said, pointing to a pile of slippers with torn ribbons and cracked soles. If your work pleases, you will be allowed to stay. If not, he smiled lightly, you will leave. Or you will be left. Andre swallowed and nodded. He sat at the bench and began to work. The moment his hands touched leather and thread, his breathing steadied. He knew this. He could do this. He stitched and reinforced, replacing weak points, pulling knots tight, counting his stitches instinctively. Each pull of thread became its own private measure, anchoring him against the estate's humming air. The servant watched for a while, then drifted away, bored. Andre kept his head down and listened. Servants spoke in passing, their words sliding by like water. He caught fragments, preparations. A presentation. The Lord's delight. A mortal dancer. A court gathering under the hollow moon. Andre's needle paused. A mortal dancer. Lulu. His chest tightened so hard he thought he might stop breathing. He forced his hands to keep moving. Show nothing. In this place, reaction was a door. Hours passed, perhaps. Time did not settle. Lanternlight never changed. Andre repaired shoes until his fingers ached and his shoulders burned. Once, a guard passed and glanced at him with mild interest, then moved on. At last, the servant returned. He lifted one of the repaired slippers, running his thumb along the seam. His brows rose slightly. Your stitches are even, he said, almost surprised. My stitches are honest, Andre replied. The servant's smile sharpened. Honesty, he mused, as if it were a novelty. Our Lord likes novelties. Andre's stomach turned. Then I can stay. The servant's gaze slid over him. You may stay as long as your usefulness holds, he said. You will be fed. You will sleep in the servant's wing. You will keep your eyes low and your questions lower. If you make yourself interesting in the wrong way, you will become entertainment. Andre nodded. Understood. The servant tilted his head. What is your name? Andre's blood went cold. No names, Madam Celinne had warned. Names were hooks. Names could be used. He forced himself to breathe. He could not refuse outright without drawing attention. He could offer something safe. Call me Maril, Andre said. It was his family name, common enough. A label, not the truth of him. The servant accepted it with a shrug, already losing interest. Maril, then, he said. Come. Andre followed him through corridors that shifted subtly, turns that felt too long, doorways that seemed to lead to slightly different places each time. He held his intent like a physical thing. Lulu. Bring her home. He was given a narrow room with a simple bed and a small window that looked out onto lantern-lit trees. The air in the room still hummed. Andre sat on the bed and pressed his palms to his eyes until he saw darkness. He was inside. Now he had to find her. The next day, if it could be called that, Andre began to learn the estate's rhythm. Workrooms and corridors. Kitchens with food that smelled delicious and tasted faintly of honey and something he couldn't name. Servants who spoke in light tones that never turned warm. Guards who moved like living statues. The whole house ran on quiet patterns, as if every person's role was a step in a larger dance. Andre made himself small, useful, unremarkable. But he watched. He listened. He learned that Lord Serrivane held rehearsals in a private hall called the Lattice Studio. He learned that performers were brought in, fey dancers, musicians, singers. He learned that Serrivane had taken an unusual interest in a mortal, and that this interest was being prepared for display. A court gathering under the hollow moon. Andre did not know what the hollow moon was, but he understood instinctively that it meant something binding. One evening, when the lanterns outside the servant's window seemed to flicker with a slightly different pulse, Andre was summoned. The servant who had first tested him appeared at the workroom door. "Maril," he said. "Your hands are needed." Andre's stomach dropped. He wiped his fingers on a cloth and stood, keeping his face blank. "Where?" The servant's smile was thin. "The Lattice Studio." Andre followed, heart hammering against his ribs. The Lattice Studio was unlike the rest of the estate. It was vast, its ceiling high and arched, its walls lined with latticed screens that let lanternlight in through patterned holes. The floor was pale wood polished so smooth it almost looked like ice. Mirrors stood at angles, reflecting the room into endless fragments. Music drifted through the air, soft, constant, a melody that seemed to move around Andre's thoughts like fingers brushing hair from a face. And there, near the center, stood Lulu. She wore a dress of pale fabric that shimmered subtly, like woven moonlight. Her hair was pinned back, but not in the neat style Madam Celinne favored. It was arranged in a way that looked intentionally effortless, as if meant to suggest she had always belonged here. A lantern-shaped comb gleamed at her temple. Andre's chest seized. Lulu's face was pale. Her expression held composure like a mask, but Andre saw the tightness around her mouth, the way her fingers curled and uncurled at her side as if trying to remember what it felt like to hold something real. Lord Serrivane stood a few steps away, watching her with an indulgent smile. He wore deep green again, silver embroidery catching the light. His presence bent the room's attention toward him like gravity. Andre kept his eyes low as he approached, because looking directly at Serrivane felt like stepping onto a stage without armor. But he could not help one glance at Lulu. Her eyes flicked toward him, quick, startled, then away. But in that single heartbeat, Andre saw it. Recognition. His throat burned. The servant nudged him forward. "Maril repairs," he announced lightly, as if presenting a pet. Serrivane's gaze slid to Andre. The Fey Lord's eyes were dark, reflecting lantern light like captured stars. He looked Andre over slowly, the way someone might assess a tool. "A human cobbler," Serrivane murmured. "How quaint." Andre forced his breathing steady. "I mend shoes, my lord," he said, careful. "I keep performers on their feet." Serrivane smiled, faint. "And yet you wear such plain boots," he said, eyes glinting. "Do you not aspire?" Andre kept his voice even. "A craftsman aspires to usefulness." Serrivane's gaze sharpened slightly, as if he heard something in Andre's tone he found amusing. "Yes," he said softly. "Usefulness. We adore usefulness." He gestured toward a small pile of slippers near the edge of the floor, silk and ribbon, delicate as flower petals. "My mortal dancer's shoes," Serrivane said. "They do not suit her properly. Fix them." Andre's stomach clenched. Lulu's shoes sat there like a small vulnerability laid bare. He walked to them with controlled steps, kneeling. He picked up one slipper and examined it with professional care, forcing his hands not to shake. They were beautiful, too beautiful. The soles were thin, the stitching decorative rather than strong. Shoes meant to look like comfort rather than provide it. Shoes meant to fail. Andre's jaw tightened. He heard Lulu begin to dance. Music rose, strings and soft drumbeats, measured and hypnotic. Lulu moved through the air with controlled grace, her body obeying the count. But Andre could see the way her movement was slightly too perfect, as if she were being guided by a rhythm that wasn't entirely hers. Serrivane watched her like a man watching his own reflection. Andre bent his head lower, hiding his expression behind his work. He pried at the stitching with his needle, careful. He could feel the room's hum press against his skull, trying to make him drift, trying to make him admire the beauty and forget the cost. He pressed his thumb against the leather token hidden in his pocket. The stitched measure under his skin steadied him. As Lulu danced, Andre began to see something else, the small choices she still made. A fraction of hesitation before a turn. A slightly sharper angle in her arm than the pattern demanded. A tiny, almost imperceptible shift in weight that didn't match the music. It was Lulu's language. The way she spoke when she was afraid. Andre's heart hammered. He tightened the slipper's sole and replaced the weak stitching with hidden strength. He reinforced the toe with a layer of leather so thin it would not show but would hold. He stitched in even pulls, counted carefully. 4, 3, pause, turn. He made each stitch a quiet vow, hold. The music stopped. Lulu ended in a poised stillness, chest rising and falling with controlled breath. She did not look at Serrivane. She looked at the floor, as if trusting it more than anything else in the room. Serrivane clapped once, slowly. The sound echoed in the vast hall like a verdict. Exquisite, he murmured. You see. He glanced at an unseen presence beyond the latticed screens, perhaps other Fae observers. The mortal understands measure. She understands surrender to rhythm. Lulu's fingers curled at her side. Her voice came soft and careful. I understand dance, my lord. Serrivane's smile widened as if she'd pleased him by using the right word. Yes, he said. And through dance you will understand belonging. Andre's stomach churned. Serrivane stepped closer to Lulu, lifting a hand toward her chin, not touching, but close enough to claim intimacy. Lulu held perfectly still, her posture rigid, her face composed. Andre's hands tightened on the slipper, and for a heartbeat he imagined standing and driving his awl through Serrivane's elegant palm. He did not move. Anger alone would get him killed. Lulu needed him alive. Serrivane's gaze shifted again, landing on Andre as if he'd remembered the human was still present. Are they repaired? He asked lightly. Andre stood, holding the slippers out with both hands, head bowed. Yes, my lord. Serrivane took them, weighing them as if he could feel the difference. His brows lifted slightly, a flicker of interest crossing his face. These feel steadier, he said, eyes narrowing. Andre kept his expression blank. Steady shoes make steady dancers. Serrivane's smile returned, smooth. Indeed. He tossed the slippers back toward Lulu, and she caught them instinctively. The motion brought her gaze up, just for an instant, and her eyes met Andre's again. Andre's heart stopped. Lulu's gaze flicked down to the slippers in her hands. Then, with a small movement so quick Serrivane could not have noticed, she pressed her thumb against the inside of the sole as if testing the reinforcement. A breath left her, barely visible. Gratitude. Andre's throat burned. Serrivane gestured lazily. You may go, Cobbler, he said. Remain useful. Andre bowed and retreated, every step measured so he would not hurry, would not draw attention. The servant guided him back toward the corridor. But as Andre passed the latticed screens, Lulu moved. She did not follow. She did not call out. She simply shifted her feet one step, then another, then a turn, then a pause. The movement was small, almost nothing. A dancer's adjustment. Andre's mind caught it like a hand catching a tossed ribbon. 4, 3, pause, turn. The same count he had stitched into his token. Lulu's head dipped slightly, a gesture like a period at the end of a sentence. The message was simple and devastating. I know you're here. Andre reached the servants' corridor with his lungs on fire. He did not allow himself to run. He did not allow himself to gasp. He walked back to his workroom with his face blank and his hands steady. Once the door was shut, he leaned against it and slid down to the floor, pressing his fist against his mouth to keep from making any sound. Relief and terror tangled inside him like knotted thread. Lulu was alive. Lulu had not been broken. But she was in Serrivane's grip, and Serrivane was preparing something that felt like a tightening noose. Andre sat for a long time with his eyes closed, listening to the hum in the walls, forcing his breathing to match his stitched measure. 4, 3, pause, turn. When he could stand without his knees shaking, he returned to work. He repaired shoes and watched. The estate's preparations grew more intense. Servants carried bolts of shimmering fabric down corridors. Musicians rehearsed in hidden rooms, their melodies spilling through walls like perfume. Guards moved with increased alertness. The servants spoke in excited murmurs. The hollow moon was nearing, the court would gather, the Lord would present his mortal treasure. Andre learned, carefully, what presentation meant. In Feylands, words were not just words. They were measures. They were weights. A public claim, made under the right rhythm and witnessed by the right eyes, could turn a desire into something dangerously close to law. A servant with pale eyes whispered to another as they passed Andre's bench, "He will name her his muse under the hollow moon." Muse. Andre's stomach sank. He did not fully understand Fae customs, but he understood enough. Names, vows, belonging. If Serrivane bound Lulu publicly, it would become harder to take her back without tearing something larger than one estate. He needed help. He needed knowledge. And the only allies he had were on the other side of the veil. That night, in his narrow room, Andre pulled out the stitched leather token and laid it on the bed. He sprinkled a pinch of Orla's salt over it, then pressed his thumb along the stitches, following their pattern as if reading Braille. He did not know if Madam Celinne could hear him across worlds. But he knew the border listened to measure. He counted his breath and tapped his fingers against the leather. 4, 3, pause, turn. 4, 3, pause, turn. Quietly, he spoke, not to the estate, not to any watching Fae, but to the air itself, to the thin place he had crossed through. "Madam Celinne," he murmured. "Orla. If you can hear this, he's preparing a court gathering. Hollow moon. He wants to present Lulu as his muse. Tell me what that means. Tell me how to stop it." He finished his count and went still. For a moment nothing happened. Then the room's lantern light flickered, not like wind but like a blink. Andre's skin prickled. He held his breath. A sound came, faint, like a thread being pulled through fabric. Not words. A rhythm. Tap, 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 tap. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap. 4, 3, pause, 1. It was not his measure. It was hers. Lulu. Andre's heart lurched. The taps came again, soft and quick, as if someone were drumming with fingernails on wood. 4, 3, pause, turn. Then another pattern, different. 2, 2, pause, 1, 1. Andre frowned, mind racing. Lulu's escape alphabet. She had joked about it once while he repaired her shoes, tapping out steps on his shop floor with a grin. He had laughed then, not realizing she had built a language out of fear. 2, 2, pause, 1, 1. It was not a word he could decode fully, not here, not with the hum in the walls pressing at him. But the intent struck him anyway, sharp as a pin, not safe. Soon. Andre pressed his palm to his mouth, eyes burning. "Hold on," he whispered, though he knew she could not hear that kind of speech. He tapped back, clumsy but desperate. 4, 3, pause, turn. The same pattern she had given him in the studio corridor, our anchor. The lantern light steadied. The hum resumed its constant rhythm, as if nothing had happened. Andre lay back on the bed, staring at the two sharp stars through his window, and forced himself not to break. The next time he saw Lulu, it was by accident, or as close to accident as anything in this place could be. He was carrying a tray of repaired slippers back to the lattice studio when a servant hurried past him and jostled his shoulder. The tray tilted. Shoes slid. Andre caught them with quick hands, but one slipper fell anyway, skidding across the polished floor and disappearing through a half-open doorway. "Careless human," the servant hissed, and swept away without helping. Andre clenched his jaw and went after the slipper. The doorway led into a smaller room, an antechamber lined with tall mirrors covered in gauzy cloth, as if someone didn't want reflections to become too honest. The air here was quieter, the hum slightly muted. And Lulu was there. She stood near a dressing table, fingers pressed against her temples. Her dress was simpler than in the studio, but still too fine, still not her. A tray of jeweled hairpins lay open beside her like a threat. Andre froze in the doorway. Lulu's head snapped up. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The world narrowed to her face, paler than it should be, eyes too bright, jaw tight with control. Then Lulu's gaze flicked to the corridor behind Andre, checking for witnesses. She moved quickly, crossing the space in a few silent steps and pulling him inside by the sleeve. Andre's breath caught at the feel of her fingers, warm, real, her. She shut the door softly and pressed her ear to it. "Are you alone?" she whispered. Andre's voice stuck in his throat. He forced it out. "Yes." Lulu sagged a fraction, shoulders dipping as if she had been holding herself upright on sheer stubbornness. Then she straightened again, because even now she refused to look weak. "How did you?" she began, then stopped. Her eyes flicked over him, checking him like she used to check her slippers. You crossed. I crossed, Andre said, and the words sounded too small for what they meant. I'm here. Lulu's lips parted. For a moment her composure cracked, and something raw flashed in her expression, relief so sharp it looked like pain. Then she swallowed and forced steadiness back into place. You shouldn't be here, she whispered. Andre's hands curled at his sides. I couldn't stay there, he said. Not knowing. Lulu's eyes flicked away, as if the intensity in his gaze was too much to hold. She started, then swallowed. He'll hurt you. Andre's stomach twisted. Has he hurt you? Lulu's fingers tightened around the edge of her own sleeve. Not like that, she said quickly, almost angrily at him, at the implication, at the whole world. He doesn't strike. He doesn't starve. Her voice dropped, and the word came out bitter. He comforts. Andre's brow furrowed. Lulu's jaw clenched. He gives me everything I don't want, she whispered. A room. Food that tastes like honey. Dresses that feel like lies. Praise that makes my skin crawl. He calls it kindness. And every kindness has a string tied to it. Andre's chest tightened. He stepped closer without thinking, then stopped, remembering the way Lulu guarded space like a boundary line. I'm sorry, he said softly. Lulu laughed under her breath, humorless. Don't be sorry. Be clever. Andre's mouth twisted. I'm trying. Her gaze flicked down to his hands, to the faint calluses, to the leather dust embedded in his nails. You look tired, she whispered. Andre didn't answer. He was tired. He could feel the hum in his bones all the time, trying to make him drift. Sometimes he woke not remembering the exact shade of Brindlewick's river at dawn, and fear would spike so hard he had to sit up and press his hands against his head until the memory returned. Instead he said, I fixed your shoes. Lulu's eyes widened slightly, and something in her face softened. I felt it, she admitted, voice barely audible. When I pressed the sole. It was steadier. Like the floor was mine again. Andre's throat burned. That was the point. Lulu exhaled slowly. Thank you, she whispered, and this time it wasn't the polite thanks she gave villagers. It was something deeper, something like trust offered on trembling hands. Andre's heart thudded painfully. He wanted, so badly, to take her hands, to pull her into his arms, to prove with touch that she was real and safe. He did none of those things. Instead he asked, what is the hollow moon? Lulu's face hardened. He hasn't told me, she said. Not directly. But I hear servants. I see the preparations. He wants to show me off. He wants witnesses. He wants to, she swallowed. He wants to make it official. Official. The word made Andre's stomach drop. I heard them say he'll name you his muse, Andre said quietly. Lulu's mouth tightened. Muse, she repeated with disgust. As if I'm a candle he lit and can now claim as his light. Andre's hands curled. Can he do it? Lulu's gaze flicked to the covered mirrors as if she didn't trust reflections to keep secrets. In this place, she whispered, words become doors. If he says it in the right way, under the right rhythm, with enough eyes watching, it becomes harder to refuse. Andre's jaw tightened. Then we won't let him. Lulu looked at him, and fear flashed. We, she echoed. Andre. Her voice said his name like an anchor thrown into deep water. Andre's breath caught. Yes, he said, and his voice went rough. We. Lulu's eyes shone. She blinked hard, forcing the wetness back. You can't challenge him, she whispered. His fae. He has rules stacked in his favor. He'll twist you. Andre swallowed. There has to be a rule that can be used against him, he said, clinging to the idea like a lifeline. He lives by rules. He keeps saying things like belonging, measure, surrender. That means, he shook his head, mind racing. That means there's a system. A law. Lulu stared at him. You sound like Madam Celinne, she said, a faint, surprised note in her voice. Andre's mouth twitched. I'll take that as a compliment. A flicker of real amusement crossed Lulu's face, brief as a lantern flame in wind. Then it was gone, replaced by urgency. You have to get out, she whispered. Now. Before someone comes. Andre hesitated. The words he had swallowed for years pressed against his teeth. In Brindlewick, he had always held them back because Lulu's friendship mattered more than his longing. Here, with her stolen and pale and standing in a room full of lying silk, the restraint felt like cowardice. But he still would not burden her with confession while she was trapped. Love that demanded something from her now would be another chain. So he said the truest thing he could without asking anything of her. I will bring you home, Andre said, voice low and steady. On your terms. Lulu's breath hitched. For a moment she looked as if she might shatter. Then she lifted her chin, stubborn as ever. Good, she whispered. Because I won't be carried like a prize. I know, Andre said. A sound echoed in the corridor outside, footsteps, light and quick. Lulu's eyes widened. She grabbed Andre's sleeve and shoved him toward the door. Go, she hissed. Go. Andre nodded once and slipped out, leaving the fallen slipper behind. He didn't care. He moved down the corridor with measured steps, heart hammering, the hum in the walls trying to swallow his fear. When he reached his workroom, he sat at the bench and forced his hands to work as if nothing had happened. But inside, something had changed. Lulu knew he was here. And he had promised out loud something that felt dangerously close to a vow. That night, Andre's exhaustion hit him like a wave. He lay on his narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, breathing shallowly. His mind replayed Lulu's face, her hands pulling him into the room, her whispered urgency. On your terms. He pressed his palm to his stitched leather token and felt its faint warmth. It steadied him, but it also reminded him, every measure had a cost. He had to plan. He began with what he knew. Serrivane valued law shaped by rhythm. Public witnesses mattered. Words mattered. If Serrivane intended to bind Lulu through presentation, Andre needed a way to interrupt that binding. He needed to learn the rules of a measure trial. The next time he was in the kitchens, Andre listened for gossip the way he once listened for customers' complaints. Servants spoke freely around him because they saw him as furniture. Hollow moon, one whispered, eyes bright. The court will gather in the mirror hall. The Lord will claim his muse and seal it with the silver measure. Can she refuse? Another asked, laughing softly. A mortal refusing in court? How charming. She can refuse, the first said, and the way the servant smiled made Andre's stomach churn. But refusal has weight here. If she refuses under the measure, she must offer something equal. Otherwise she is simply being contrary, the other finished, amused. And contrariness is corrected. Andre's fingers tightened around the tray he carried. Otherwise she is corrected. He forced his face blank and walked away. In the workroom, he pulled out scrap leather and began to stitch in secret whenever he could. He stitched small reinforcements into soles, hidden anchors, each one tied to the 4/3 turn pattern Lulu had recognized. He didn't know yet how he would get them to her, but he knew she needed every advantage possible. He also stitched another thing, a longer strip of leather with a more complex pattern, counts that matched the rumor he'd heard, silver measure. He didn't know the exact rhythm, but he knew how to listen now. In corridors, when musicians rehearsed, he tried to catch the underlying cadence, tap patterns, breath patterns, foot patterns. He counted silently until his head ached. Sometimes, after long hours, he would forget for a heartbeat what Ludka's face looked like. He'd close his eyes and see only lantern light. Panic would claw at him until he forced himself to recall Mirelle's sharp cheekbones, the way her mouth tightened when she argued, the way she had looked tonight at the river bend broken. Andre began to understand the cost Madam Celinne had warned him about. The estate did not steal memory with a knife. It sanded it away with sweetness. One evening, the pale-eyed servant who oversaw repairs brought Andre a new set of shoes, finer than anything the servants usually wore. The leather was supple, the stitching ornate. They gleamed as if already polished by invisible hands. A gift, the servant said lightly. From our Lord. For your service. Andre stared. His stomach turned. Gifts were strings. I don't need them, Andre said carefully. The servant's smile sharpened. Need is irrelevant, he murmured. Acceptance is polite. Andre held the servant's gaze and felt the hum in the air press against his skull, urging compliance, urging gratitude. Alla's voice echoed in his mind, if some pretty thing offers you comfort, spit in its hand. Andre forced himself to swallow and choose a safer version of defiance. My boots fit, he said evenly. A craftsman trusts what he has broken in. The servant's eyes narrowed, annoyance flickering. Then the smile returned. Stubborn, he said, almost fond. Very well. Keep your plainness. It suits you. He left the ornate shoes behind anyway, setting them on Andre's bench like bait. Andre waited until the servant was gone, then shoved the shoes into a trunk and poured salt into them until the leather was crusted white. If they were a hook, let them choke on their own sweetness. The hollow moon drew closer. The estate's atmosphere tightened, humming louder, as if the whole place were drawing breath for a single, massive count. Andre saw guards polishing weapons that looked decorative but felt wrong when he passed, too light, too sharp, too eager. He saw servants carrying mirrors, large, heavy, their surfaces covered in cloth. He saw Lulu only once more in passing, crossing a corridor flanked by 2 guards. She walked with her chin lifted, posture perfect. Her hands were empty, her expression unreadable. But as she passed Andre's workroom doorway, her gaze flicked in, quick, like a needle's prick. Andre's heart lurched. Lulu's fingers moved once at her side, barely visible, 2 taps against her thigh, then 2, then a pause, then 1-1. 2, pause, 1. Not safe. Soon. Andre pressed his lips together hard enough to hurt, then turned back to his stitching with renewed urgency. He needed a moment alone with Lulu again, long enough to place the anchored shoes into her hands and to tell her what he had learned. Long enough to plan a path out. He couldn't request it. Requests here were invitations to bargain. So he created an accident. On the day before the hollow moon gathering, Andre volunteered, quietly, casually, to deliver repaired slippers to the lattice studio again. Servants liked useful hands. They liked when work happened without being asked. The pale-eyed servant handed him a tray and waved him off with barely a glance. Be quick, he said. The mortal rehearses. Andre carried the tray through corridors, heart-pounding. In the lattice studio, music drifted like mist. Lulu moved through a sequence alone this time, no other dancers near her, only Serrivane watching from a high-backed chair, one leg crossed over the other, fingers tapping faintly against the armrest in a pattern Andre did not like. Andre entered quietly, keeping his gaze low. He approached the edge of the floor and set the tray down. Serrivane's gaze slid to him. Cobbler, he murmured, amused. Always underfoot. Andre bowed shallowly. My lord. Serrivane's eyes narrowed slightly, as if the sound of Andre's voice interested him. You have been useful, he said. Perhaps you will be rewarded. Andre's stomach turned. I require no reward, he said carefully. Serrivane's smile deepened. Everyone requires reward, he murmured. Some simply pretend otherwise. Lulu's dance ended. She stood breathing hard, chest rising and falling, eyes fixed on a point on the wall as if she refused to let her gaze drift to Serrivane. Serrivane rose smoothly. Again, he said. Lulu's jaw tightened. She lifted her arms. Andre's fingers curled. He could not take much more of watching her be used like a beautiful mechanism. He needed her attention without Serrivane's. He bent as if to adjust the tray, then accidentally bumped it with his knee. One repaired slipper slid off and skidded across the polished floor, farther than it should have, as if the wood wanted to help it escape. It disappeared behind one of the latticed screens. Serrivane's gaze sharpened. Clumsy, he said, mild annoyance in his tone. Andre bowed again, forcing humility. Forgive me, my lord. I'll retrieve it. Serrivane waved a hand. Do so. Do not disrupt her measure. Andre slipped behind the latticed screen. The space beyond was a narrow corridor-like gap that led to another door, one that opened into a small storage chamber lined with costumes. As Andre stepped in, he felt the hum dampen again, as if fabric absorbed sound. And there, like the estate had decided to be cruel and kind in the same breath, Lulu stood just inside, facing him. Her eyes were wide, startled. She had followed the skidding slipper. For a heartbeat, Andre thought, the estate wants this. The thought iced his spine. But Lulu's gaze flicked behind him, checking the screen, checking for Serrivane's view, and her urgency looked too human to be orchestrated. Quickly, Lulu whispered. Andre's hands moved without hesitation. He reached into his coat and pulled out a wrapped bundle, plain cloth, the kind he used in his shop. He pressed it into Lulu's hands. What is, Lulu began. Shoes, Andre whispered. Anchored. Steady. Hidden reinforcement. They'll help you hold your own measure under his glamour. Lulu's fingers trembled as she unwrapped the cloth enough to see the satin, the subtle strength in the stitching. Her breath hitched. You made these, she breathed. I made them, Andre said. Listen. The hollow moon gathering, he wants witnesses. He wants to name you his muse under a silver measure. If he does it, refusing will cost you. Lulu's face drained of color. What kind of cost? I don't know exactly, Andre admitted, and hated the uncertainty. But servants said refusal must be paid equally or it will be corrected. Lulu's jaw tightened. Corrected, she whispered, fury sharpening her fear. As if I'm a crooked hem. Andre's throat burned. We need to stop the claim from being sealed, he said urgently. We need to, he swallowed. We need a rule that protects your choice. Lulu's eyes flashed. Choice doesn't matter here, she whispered. Everything is a bargain. Andre shook his head. If everything is a bargain, then there's a way to bargain back, he said. A lawful contest. A trial. I heard servants mention a measure trial. Lulu's brow furrowed. A trial, she repeated slowly. He wouldn't risk a trial unless he was certain he'd win. Maybe, Andre said. But he also wouldn't expect a human cobbler to know enough to challenge. Lulu stared at him, and Andre saw something shift, hope, dangerous and fragile. You crossed the veil for me, Lulu whispered, as if she was still trying to accept the reality of it. Andre's chest tightened. Of course I did, he said, and the words came out rougher than he intended. I couldn't, he stopped himself, because the rest of the sentence was I couldn't lose you, and he could not put that weight on her right now. Lulu's fingers tightened around the wrapped shoes. Andre, she said softly. A sound filtered through the fabric walls, Serrivane's voice, faint but sharp. Where is she? Lulu flinched. Andre's stomach dropped. He hadn't realized how quickly time would snap. Go, Andre whispered urgently. Take the shoes. Keep your will close. Don't accept gifts. Don't agree to anything. If he tries to make you speak under the silver measure, Andre's mind raced, searching for something useful. Stall. Ask questions. Questions slow bargains. Lulu's gaze fixed on him, fierce. And you, she whispered. Andre swallowed hard. I'll find the rule, he said. I'll find the crack. Lulu's eyes shone. She blinked once, hard, then lifted her chin. Don't be brave in a foolish way, she whispered. Be alive. Andre's throat burned. I will, he promised. Lulu hesitated, then, so quickly it almost didn't happen, she reached out and pressed her fingers against Andre's wrist. Not a grasp. Not a plea. A touch like a vow without words. Warmth shot through Andre's arm and lodged in his chest. Then she pulled away and slipped toward the door, wrapping the shoes back in cloth with quick hands. Andre grabbed the fallen slipper from the floor and followed her out a heartbeat later, keeping his face blank as he returned behind the lattice screen. Serrivane stood near the center of the studio now, his posture relaxed but his gaze sharp. Lulu had already resumed her place, arms lifted, face composed. Andre stepped out, bowed, and placed the retrieved slipper back on the tray. Serrivane's eyes slid over Andre with slow assessment. For a terrifying moment, Andre thought the Fey Lord could smell secrets. Then Serrivane's attention returned to Lulu, possessive and pleased. Again, Serrivane said, and his voice hummed with cadence. Lulu began to dance. This time, Andre saw her feet settle into the floor with a fraction more certainty, as if the thought of anchored shoes waiting for her gave her spine a hidden steel. Andre carried the tray out with steady hands, but his mind was a storm. He had done what he could for Lulu in the moment. Now he had to do the harder thing, learn a law that could defeat a lord. In Fey lands, law was not written on paper. It was written in rhythm, witnessed and remembered by those who cared about power. Andre returned to his workroom and sat at the bench, staring at his needle until the metal blurred. Then he did what he had always done when faced with an impossible repair. He broke the problem down into parts. Serrivane planned a claim under the silver measure at the Hollow Moon gathering in the Mirror Hall. A claim could be challenged if Andre could invoke the right custom. But Andre had no standing. No rank. No recognized relationship to Lulu. No vow spoken between them that the Fae would honor. And yet, he had one thing Serrivane did not expect from a human. A truth held steady for years. He loved her. The thought hit Andre like a blow. He sat utterly still, needle poised above leather. He had never said it. He had never required anything from it. He had simply lived it in mended ribbons, in quiet walks, in 1,000 small choices that put Lulu's well-being ahead of his own longing. If Fae law respected measure and intent, then perhaps the most powerful thing he could bring was not a grand claim. Perhaps it was consistency. Andre lowered his needle and began to stitch again, faster now, hands sure. He stitched a pattern into a strip of leather that was not just count but declaration. 4-3 pause turn, repeated, anchored by knots that held. Each knot he tied with the same words in his mind. On her terms. On her terms. On her terms. The hum in the walls pressed at him, trying to soften his resolve with sweetness. Andre tightened his jaw and stitched anyway. When he finished, he held the strip up to the lanternlight. It looked ordinary. But under his thumb, it felt like a line drawn in the dark. He didn't know yet exactly how he would use it. But he knew the turning point had arrived. The Hollow Moon was coming. And Andre Marrel was no longer simply sneaking through a lord's estate. He was preparing to challenge the very rhythm the Fae used to turn desire into ownership. The estate changed its breathing on the eve of the Hollow Moon. Andre felt it before he saw it. The constant hum beneath the walls tightened, rising half a note, like a song taking in air for a long-held phrase. Servants moved faster, their steps more precise. Guards stopped pretending to be bored. Even the lanterns seemed to glow with a cleaner, colder light, as if warmth had been polished out of them. In the kitchens, sugar was poured into bowls that shone like snowdrifts. In the corridors, bolts of fabric, silver-threaded, moon-pale, were carried like sacred offerings. A musician passed Andre with a harp case under his arm, eyes unfocused, lips moving silently as he rehearsed counts. All of it pointed toward one place. The Mirror Hall. Andre spent the hours before the gathering doing what he had trained himself to do since arriving: remain useful, remain small, remain uninteresting. He repaired shoes for visiting courtiers, slippers that looked like petals, boots edged with embroidery, delicate laces that snapped if you breathed wrong. Hands came and went with casual entitlement, offering him footwear like they were offering him proof they existed. He stitched, knot by knot, counting under his breath to keep his mind from drifting into the estate's sweetness. 4-3 pause turn. He kept Orla's salt in his pocket, a small, gritty reassurance. He kept his stitched leather token pressed against his palm when no one watched. He kept Lulu's face in his mind like a lantern flame cupped against wind. As the night deepened, though the sky never truly darkened here, only sharpened, he was summoned. The pale-eyed servant appeared in the workroom doorway, looking pleased in the way a cat looks pleased when it has decided it owns a mouse. Marrel, he said. Come. You will attend the Mirror Hall. Shoes will be needed. Andre's stomach dropped. Attending meant being close to Serrivane. Close to Lulu. Close to the moment when words could become law. Andre nodded once and wiped his hands on his cloth. He kept his face blank. Inside, every part of him was braced. The corridors to the Mirror Hall were lined with lanterns that floated at shoulder height. Their light cast no shadows. That should have been impossible. Andre's skin prickled as he walked beneath them, feeling as if the air itself had been swept clean of hiding places. At the hall's entrance, guards stood in silver-edged masks. Their eyes were too reflective, their stillness too perfect. Andre lowered his gaze as he passed, carrying a tray of repair tools and spare laces like a harmless tradesman. The Mirror Hall was not a hall so much as a world built of reflection. its ceiling arched high and clear, made of something like glass, and above it hung the hollow moon, huge, pale, and unnervingly close. It did not glow like a friendly lantern. It glowed like a watching eye. Mirrors rose in panels along every wall, angled to multiply the space into impossible depth. Candlelight, if it could be called that, burned in silver sconces, but the flames did not flicker. Music drifted from an unseen gallery, strings plucking a steady cadence that slid under the skin. The court was already gathered. Fae moved through the hall like an elegant tide, all of them wearing masks, gold, silver, bone-white, lacquer-black. Their clothing shimmered and shifted with every turn, never settling into a single color. Laughter floated like perfume. Conversations sounded light, but Andre heard the sharpness beneath them, measuring, weighing, assessing. He stayed near the edge with other servants and tradesfolk, as invisible as he could manage. He fixed a snapped ribbon for a courtier who did not thank him. He knelt to tighten a clasp on a boot while his ears strained toward the hall's center. A raised platform stood beneath the hollow moon's light. A silver circle was inlaid into the floor, their fine metal lines forming a spiral that made Andre's eyes ache if he stared too long. The silver measure. Beside the circle stood Lord Serrivane Thorneveyl. He wore a mask tonight, silver, smooth, the mouth shaped into a gentle smile that never changed. His clothing was deep green shot through with metallic thread, and the embroidery seemed to move when he breathed, like vines shifting in water. And at his right hand, Lulu. Andre's lungs forgot how to work for a heartbeat. She was dressed in pale fabric again, but tonight it was more ornate, a gown that caught light and threw it back as if she were made of lantern glow. Her hair was pinned with jeweled combs that looked like tiny moons. Her posture was flawless. Her face was composed. But Andre saw the truth anyway. He saw the tension in her jaw. The way her fingers pressed lightly against her own palm, as if trying to feel something real. The way her eyes flicked to the silver circle and away again, like a person watching the edge of a cliff. Lulu's gaze swept the hall once, quick, controlled, and for the smallest instant her eyes found Andre's place at the edge. Recognition flared. Then she looked away, because looking too long would be a doorway Serrivane could notice. Andre forced his hands to steady. He tightened a lace with careful fingers that barely felt connected to his body. He kept his breathing even. 4, 3, pause, turn. A ripple moved through the court as music shifted. Conversations quieted. Laughter faded to a hush. Serrivane stepped into the silver spiral. The hall seemed to lean toward him. Mirrors caught his reflection 100 times and offered it back like worship. He lifted one hand. The gesture was small and precise, but the air answered. The hum beneath the floor rose, threading itself through the strings' melody. Andre felt it in his teeth. My court, Serrivane said, voice smooth as polished stone. Under the hollow moon, we gather to witness a choosing. The word choosing made Andre's stomach twist, because it was dressed up like freedom while being built like a cage. Serrivane turned slightly, presenting Lulu like a work of art. A mortal came to us, he continued, bearing a gift rarer than gold, harmony drawn from chaos. Measure shaped from stubborn will. Soft laughter shimmered through the hall, appreciative, amused, hungry. Lulu's shoulders tightened. Her chin lifted another fraction. Serrivane's voice dropped, velvet and dangerous. You have danced in my halls. You have tasted peace unbroken by mortal noise. You have been offered honor. Lulu's voice came soft and clear, and Andre's heart lurched at the sound of it. I have been offered comfort with strings attached. A flicker of surprise passed through the nearest masks. A few murmurs rose, delight at the mortal's audacity. Serrivane's silver smile did not change. Strings, he repeated lightly. How mortal. Everything is attached to something, Lulu. He said her name again like he was threading it into the hall itself. Lulu took a slow breath. Then I'll ask my questions, she said, and the steadiness in her tone was a razor. If you want witnesses, they can witness truth as well. Andre's chest tightened. Questions, slow bargains. Good. Clever girl. Serrivane tilted his head as if indulging a child. Ask. If you name me your muse, Lulu said, voice calm, what am I required to give? A hush fell. Even the music seemed to soften, listening. Serrivane's gaze, behind that unmoving mask, felt like it slid over her skin. You give your art, he said. Your presence. Your measure. And if I refuse, Lulu asked, still steady, what happens to me? A ripple of laughter, low, pleased, moved through the crowd. Serrivane stepped closer, still within the silver spiral. Refusal under the silver measure is costly, he murmured. It is not punished. It is simply balanced. Balanced. Corrected. The word wore silk but hid teeth. Lulu's fingers curled. Balanced by what? Serrivane's voice stayed gentle. By what you value most. Andre's stomach dropped like he'd missed a stare. Lulu's gaze flicked toward the hall's edge, toward Andre, so quick it might have been imagined. Serrivane noticed. His head turned, just slightly. The pressure in the room tightened. Andre felt the estate's attention slide toward him like a blade drawn slowly from a sheath. He kept his eyes down. He adjusted a strap. He willed his heartbeat to quiet. Serrivane's voice floated across the hall. It seems my mortal has brought an admirer, he murmured, and laughter glittered in the mirrors. How sweet. How inevitable. Andre's hands went cold. Serrivane lifted his hand again, and the musicians shifted into a new cadence, cleaner, sharper, threaded with metallic brightness. The silver spiral on the floor seemed to glow. The silver measure begins, Serrivane said. Lulu stiffened. Serrivane extended his hand toward her, palm up, courtly. Step into the spiral, he invited, and the invitation was a hook. Lulu hesitated. The hall held its breath. Then Lulu stepped forward slowly, carefully, placing her foot just inside the silver line. Andre's chest seized. He watched the way her foot settled, the way her ankle held. He watched the subtle tension in her shoulders. Her shoes. She was still wearing the ones Serrivane had given her, the too delicate ones meant to fail. Andre's mind flashed hot with panic. He had given her the anchored pair. But she hadn't been able to wear them, she must not have had time, or Serrivane must have forbidden it. Serrivane's hand rose toward Lulu's wrist. Before he touched her, Lulu spoke again, sharp as a snapped ribbon. Before you claim me, she said, answer one more question. Amusement rippled. Serrivane paused. Yes. Do I have the right, Lulu asked, voice steady, to stand on my own feet while you speak? The question was simple. The meaning was not. A few masks turned, intrigued. A courtier leaned toward another, murmuring. The Fae loved games when they believed they were the ones playing. Serrivane's silver smile remained unchanged. Of course, he said softly. Stand. Lulu took half a step back, still within the spiral but out of Serrivane's reach. Her posture straightened. Her eyes fixed forward, refusing to lower. Andre's breath came shallow. Lulu was buying time. Serrivane began to speak, slow, measured words matched to the music's cadence. The sound slid under Andre's skin like cold honey. The mirrors seemed to brighten with each syllable. The air thickened, humming so hard Andre felt it in his bones. Lulu's shoulders trembled once. Her eyes flickered. Andre saw it. The silver measure was not just language. It was rhythm pressed against will, encouraging the body to yield. Lulu's hands tightened at her sides. Her jaw clenched. She fought. But her feet shifted, small, involuntary, aligning with Serrivane's cadence as if her own training betrayed her. Her body knew how to obey measure beautifully. A wave of sick fear rose in Andre's throat. Serrivane's voice grew softer, more intimate, as if he were speaking only to her. Say yes, he murmured, and the hall seemed to echo it back in 100 reflections. Say you belong. Lulu's lips parted. Andre's vision narrowed. If she spoke under the silver measure, if she gave the court a word to anchor. Andre's hands moved before his mind finished arguing. He stepped forward. A servant hissed, grabbing at his sleeve, but Andre shook free. He walked straight toward the spiral, boots loud on the polished floor. The hall reacted like a single creature sensing disturbance. Conversations died. Laughter vanished. Masks turned toward him. Serrivane's head lifted. The silver smile did not change, but the air around him sharpened. Andre stopped at the edge of the silver spiral and bowed, not deeply, not humbly, but correctly, the way a man bows when he refuses to be made smaller. My lord, Andre said, voice steady despite the roar of his pulse. Serrivane's gaze pinned him. Cobbler, he murmured, amused and dangerous. Did you lose your place? Andre swallowed. The hum tried to press his thoughts into softness, tried to make him feel foolish for interrupting beauty. He pressed his palm against the stitched leather token in his pocket until the thread bit into his skin. I request lawful interruption, Andre said, and the words landed like a stone dropped into still water. A ripple of delighted surprise moved through the masks. The Fae loved a spectacle. Serrivane's voice remained gentle. Lawful, he repeated. From a human tradesman. Andre kept his eyes on the silver line, not Serrivane's mask. A claim made under witness can be challenged under witness, Andre said. He didn't know if the phrasing was perfect. He only knew it was true enough to force the court to listen. By measure. Serrivane's silver mask tilted. And what measure do you offer, little cobbler? Andre's throat burned. The measure of her will. The hall went very quiet. Lulu's head turned sharply. Her eyes found Andre's, wide with shock and fear. Andre did not look away. Serrivane laughed softly, like wind chimes in winter. Her will, he murmured. How charming. You presume she has will separate from the rhythm I offer. Andre's voice tightened. She has will separate from you. The words rang out, plain and human, and Andre felt them land in the mirrors like a challenge thrown. For the first time, something in Serrivane's presence shifted. The air grew colder. And who are you, Serrivane asked softly, to speak for a mortal in my hall? The trap snapped into view. Names. Hooks. Andre's pulse hammered. He chose his next words like stepping onto thin ice. I am the one who mends what keeps her feet true, he said. And I refuse to witness her being measured into ownership. Murmurs rose. Curiosity. Delight. Hunger. Serrivane's hand lifted slightly, and the music's cadence tightened again, pressing, coaxing, binding. Andre felt the hum surge toward him now, trying to fold his defiance into the hall's rhythm. His mouth went dry. For a terrifying moment, he understood how Lulu had been made to move. Serrivane stepped closer to the edge of the spiral, voice soft enough that it felt like it brushed Andre's ear. If you want to challenge, he murmured, offer your true name. Let the court know what it measures. Andre's stomach clenched. The hall waited. If he refused, Serrivane could dismiss him as meaningless. If he gave his name, Serrivane could hook him with it. Andre's fingers tightened around Aula's salt pouch in his pocket until the grains bit his palm. He thought of Brindlewick, muddy lanes, honest wind, lantern hooks waiting for light. He thought of Lulu's laughter in his shop. He thought of the way Lulu's fingers had pressed his wrist in that costume room, a touch like a vow without words. He could not give Serrivane a hook. So Andre did the only thing he could think of. He paid a cost. He lifted his chin and spoke, not his name, but his intent, sharp, clear, and measured. I am here to bring her home, he said, and as he spoke he pressed his thumb against the stitched leather token and let the cadence run through his body. 4, 3, pause, turn. The hum resisted, like a current pushing against him. Andre pushed back. For a heartbeat, his vision blurred. A memory, small, ordinary, slipped from his grasp like a ribbon dropped in water. He reached for it instinctively and found only blankness. What was it? The smell of his master's workroom? The exact sound of his mother's voice? He couldn't tell. The absence was immediate and sickening. But the hum loosened. Andre stayed standing. Across from him, Lulu's breath hitched. She looked suddenly more present, as if Andre's defiance had cut a slit in the glamour fog. Serrivane's silver mask remained still, but the air around him sharpened into something like anger. So noble, he murmured, voice now edged. So mortal. You think intent alone can stand against law. Andre's voice came rough. Then let it be tested by law. A ripple of excitement surged through the court. Serrivane held the silence a moment longer, letting the hall taste suspense. Then he spread his hands as if granting a gift. Very well, he said, smooth again. A trial. The mirrors seemed to brighten. The court will be amused, Serrivane murmured. We will measure your claim against mine. Lulu's eyes widened. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Serrivane's gaze slid to her, intimate and possessive even through a mask. Do not hope, he said softly, and somehow Lulu heard it anyway. Hope is a mortal habit. It breaks beautifully. Andre's fists clenched. He stepped closer to the silver line without crossing it. What trial? He demanded, careful not to phrase it as a plea. Serrivane's smile returned, the silver mask's mouth unchanged but the air full of cruel satisfaction. The measure trial, he said. The weighing. A contest of cadence and intent. Andre's stomach tightened. And what is weighed? Serrivane's voice lowered. Truth, he murmured. And the cost you will pay to hold it. The hall murmured again, delighted. Serrivane gestured, and servants moved. Mirrors were turned. Cloths were lifted. The mirror hall's reflections multiplied until Andre saw himself a dozen times, pale, tense, a human speck in a sea of masked immortals. The music shifted, falling into a slow, relentless rhythm that pressed against the ribs. Serrivane lifted one hand. The mortal will dance, he said, voice smooth. And the court will see whose measure holds her. Lulu stiffened, her face paling. Andre's heart lurched. No, he said, too sharply, then corrected himself with effort. She will not be used as the rope in your tug-of-war. Serrivane's silver mask turned toward him. She is the prize, he murmured. Of course she is involved. Andre's jaw clenched. Then let her choose the step, he said, forcing logic into the hall like a wedge. If you measure her will, you must allow her will to show. A hush. Masks turned, intrigued. This was interesting. This was the kind of rule twist the Fae adored, especially when they expected it to backfire. Serrivane considered. The silver mouth smiled. How fair, Serrivane said softly. How mortal. He inclined his head toward Lulu. Choose your step, Lulu, he said, voice velvet. Dance your truth. Lulu's chest rose and fell. Her eyes flicked to Andre, fear, warning, a desperate question. Andre held her gaze, steady as he could be. On your terms. Lulu's jaw tightened. She swallowed. Then she lifted her chin and stepped forward into the spiral. The moment her foot crossed the silver line, the hum surged, hungry. Lulu's shoulders trembled. Her lips parted as if the hall wanted to speak through her. Andre's stomach turned. Then Lulu's gaze sharpened. She didn't look at Serrivane. She didn't look at the watching masks. She looked down at her feet. And in that single, deliberate motion, Lulu slid out of her two delicate slippers. Silk shoes fell to the floor like shed skin. A ripple of surprise moved through the court, laughter, delighted and scandalized. Serrivane's posture snapped tight. What are you doing? He asked softly, and the softness was suddenly a threat. Lulu's voice came clear, and Andre's chest cracked open at the sound of it. Standing on my own feet, she said. Barefoot on the polished wood, Lulu placed her toes, tested the floor, and breathed in. Andre saw her find herself again, find the floor's truth without the lie of gifted shoes. Then Lulu began to move. Not Serrivane's cadence. Not the music's coaxing count. Her own. It started small, one step, then another, then a turn that looked almost like the beginning of the spiral of lanterns, but altered, sharpened, made more personal. Her arms lifted, not for display, but like she was carving space around her body and claiming it. The hall's hum shuddered. Serrivane lifted his hand, fingers moving in a pattern that made the mirrors flash. The air thickened, trying to pull Lulu's steps back into his rhythm. Lulu faltered, just a fraction, knees softening, breath catching. Andre's heart seized. He stepped forward, palm out, pressing his thumb hard against the stitched leather token. 4, 3, pause, turn. He fed his own measure into the air like a brace. The hum fought him. Cold honey flooded his mouth. His vision blurred again, and another memory threatened to slide away. He felt it, something slipping, like trying to hold water in his hands. Andre gritted his teeth and held. Lulu's shoulders lifted. She regained balance. Her dance sharpened, her steps turning into defiance made visible. Serrivane's silver mask tilted, and for the first time his voice lost its amused calm. "Stop," he said softly. Lulu did not stop. She turned, faster, arms sweeping, hair loosening from pins, jeweled combs scattering like fallen stars. The movement was not decorative. It was survival. The court held its breath, thrilled. Serrivane's hand moved again, faster, more forceful. The air snapped tight like a pulled string. Lulu stumbled. Andre's pulse roared. He felt the hum surge at him with sudden cruelty, as if the hall had decided he was no longer amusing. A voice, sweet, intimate, seemed to slide into Andre's head, not through ears but through bone. "You can end this," it murmured. "Give your name. Give your claim. Give your right to her and I will let her go." Andre's stomach dropped. Bargain. Hook. Trap. He nearly swayed. The offer struck a tender place, because some part of him, deep and human, wanted to claim Lulu simply to keep her safe. Then he remembered Lulu's voice, "I'm not a prize." Andre swallowed hard and spat the offer out with silence. He pressed Orla's salt pouch against his palm until grains dug into skin, anchoring him with pain. "No," he whispered, "not as a bargain, not as a promise, just refusal." The hum surged again, and Andre felt memory tear like fabric. For a heartbeat, he couldn't remember the exact color of Lulu's eyes. Panic clawed his throat. Then he saw Lulu's face in front of him, real and moving and fighting, and the color returned not because the memory was safe, but because she was there. Andre's knees trembled. He stayed standing. Serrivane's voice cut through the hall, edged now. "Enough," he said, and the word struck the music like a whip. The strings stopped. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was predatory. Lulu stood inside the silver spiral, breathing hard, hair half fallen, bare feet planted like roots. Her chest rose and fell. Her eyes were fierce. Serrivane stepped toward her, and the air moved with him like a tide. "You embarrass yourself," he murmured, and the softness was poison. Lulu lifted her chin. "No," she said, voice steady. "I refuse to be made pretty for your ownership." A gasp, delighted, scandalized, rippled through the masks. Serrivane's posture went very still. The silver mask smile did not change, but Andre felt the rage beneath it like heat through stone. "You do not understand what you refuse," Serrivane said quietly. Lulu's voice came sharp as a blade. "I understand perfectly." Serrivane turned his head toward Andre. "And you," he murmured, "have made yourself interesting." Andre's mouth went dry. The hall's attention pinned him like a nail. Serrivane spread his hands as if blessing them both. "Very well," he said, voice smooth again, but now the smoothness was the kind that comes before a cut. "The weighing will proceed." He gestured toward the silver spiral, and the metal lines brightened, pulsing with a steady, relentless cadence. "Tomorrow," Serrivane said softly, "under the full hollow moon's peak, we will measure whose truth holds, the cobbler's intent, or my claim." Andre's stomach sank. Tomorrow meant time for Serrivane to prepare traps. Tomorrow meant Lulu had to survive the night. Serrivane's gaze slid to Lulu, intimate and cruel. "Rest," he murmured. "You will need your strength." Lulu's jaw tightened. Guards moved forward. Andre's fists clenched. He made a half-step toward Lulu. Serrivane lifted one finger, and the air snapped tight again, not enough to bind, but enough to warn. Andre stopped, chest heaving, hands trembling with restrained violence. Lulu's gaze flicked to him, quick and fierce. "Be alive," her earlier whisper echoed. Andre forced himself to breathe. As guards guided Lulu from the spiral, she didn't look back at Serrivane. She didn't look at the court. She looked at Andre just once, and in her eyes he saw something that had not been there when she first arrived in Feylands. Not hope as a fragile wish. Hope as a decision. Then she was gone behind masks and mirrors, swallowed by the estate's gleaming corridors. Andre stood at the edge of the silver spiral, knees trembling, the hum still pressing against his skull. His stitched leather token felt hot against his palm, as if it had absorbed the hall's cruelty and his own resolve. He had forced a trial. He had bought time. And he had paid for it. He could feel the edges of his memory fraying, little blank places where sweetness had sanded him down. Behind him, laughter resumed, soft, delighted. The court was entertained. Serrivane stepped back into the spiral and inclined his silver-masked head toward Andre like a gracious host concluding a performance. "Sleep well, little cobbler," Serrivane murmured. "Tomorrow we measure what you are willing to lose." Andre did not bow. He did not speak. He simply pressed his palm against the salted stitch pattern and held his intent like a blade, because now there was no more sneaking, no more hiding in workrooms. Tomorrow, in the mirror hall beneath the hollow moon, he would have to break a lord's claim without breaking Lulu's will. The estate did not sleep. It only quieted its surfaces, as if drawing a veil over its own anticipation. Lanternlight stayed steady. Music softened but never vanished. The hum beneath the walls continued, patient as a metronome, measuring Andre's breaths even when he tried to rest. In his narrow room, Andre sat on the edge of the bed with his tools laid out before him like offerings: needle, waxed cord, a strip of leather stitched in 4/3 turn until the pattern was practically carved into the hide. A small pouch of Orla's salt. A broken lace he'd kept from one of Lulu's old slippers back in Brindlewick, frayed and ordinary, the kind of thing no fey court would value and therefore the kind of thing that might still be true. He pressed the lace between his fingers and forced his mind to stay anchored in what mattered. Lulu's hands, warm and trembling. Lulu's voice, steady when it shouldn't have been. Lulu barefoot in the silver measure, refusing to be made pretty for ownership. Somewhere in the estate, she was being prepared for tomorrow, fed honeyed comfort, dressed in lies, spoken to in velvet threats. The thought made Andre's stomach twist. He rose and paced the small room, counting steps to keep his thoughts from sliding into panic. 4, 3, pause, turn. He whispered the count to himself until it became breath. Then, when the hum pressed harder, as if sensing his resolve, Andre pressed his thumb to the stitched leather and tapped his fingers in answer. Measure against measure. The lantern in his room flickered once. Andre stopped cold. The air shifted the way it had at the willow-thin place, the way it had in the studio when Lulu sent him her pattern. He held his breath, listening for rhythm the way he listened for a stitch catching wrong. A tap came, soft, precise, through the floorboards, as if the house itself had become a drum. Tap 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 tap. Tap tap tap. Pause. Tap. 4, 3, pause, 1. Not Lulu. Different. Madam Celinne. Andre's throat tightened so hard it hurt. He dropped to one knee, palm pressed flat on the floor, and tapped back with shaking fingers. 4, 3, pause, turn. Our anchor. I'm here. The taps returned, sharper this time, like a reprimand delivered in rhythm. Tap tap. Tap. Pause. Tap tap. Pause. Tap. 2, 1, pause, 2, pause, 1. It wasn't a word Andre could translate neatly, but the intent hit him with startling clarity, as if his body understood before his mind did. Do not let him name you. Keep your feet. Keep her choice. Andre exhaled, the sound almost a sob he refused to become. He tapped back once, 4, 3, pause, turn, then pressed his forehead to the floorboards for a heartbeat and let himself feel, fully and fiercely, that he was not alone in this. When he rose, his hands were steadier. He spent the rest of the night stitching without pause, not because he needed more leatherwork, but because he needed the act of making something honest to keep his mind from being sanded down by sweetness. He stitched a final reinforcement into a pair of plain slippers meant for a servant, nothing remarkable, then tucked Orla's salt into the seam, just a pinch, hidden. A small grit in the glamour. He didn't know if he would need it. He only knew he could not go into the mirror hall empty-handed. When the summons came, it came like a bell struck clean. The pale-eyed servant appeared at Andre's workroom door at what might have been dawn, though the sky never softened here. Maril, he said, satisfaction bright in his gaze. Come. The court gathers. Andre wiped his hands, tucked his leather token into his inner pocket, and followed. The corridors toward the mirror hall were lined with mirrors covered in cloth, as if the estate itself was holding its breath. Servants moved in disciplined lines. Guards in silver-edged masks stood at every doorway. The hum beneath the floor rose, sharp and hungry, as Andre approached the hall's entrance. Inside, the court waited. The mirror hall glowed with cold beauty, the hollow moon huge above the arched ceiling, its pale light spilling down like poured silver. The mirrors along the walls were uncovered now, reflecting the gathered fae 100 times over, masked faces, shimmering garments, eyes like polished stone. The air tasted faintly of honey and something metallic, like old coins. The silver measure spiral gleamed inlaid into the floor. Lord Serrivane stood within it, silver mask in place, posture smooth as a blade sheathed. And Lulu stood opposite him. Tonight she wore a gown like moonlit water, sleeves drifting like mist when she moved. Her hair had been pinned into an elaborate arrangement again, jeweled combs set like little crescents. Her face was composed. But Andre saw the cost in the way her throat worked when she swallowed, in the way her fingers kept finding her own palm as if searching for an anchor. Her gaze flicked to Andre at the edge, quick, fierce, and the smallest motion of her hand followed, 2 taps against her thigh, then 2, a pause, then 1. Not safe. Soon. Andre's chest tightened, but he held his face blank. This was not the moment to send comfort. Comfort could be used like a hook. He pressed his thumb against his stitched leather token in his pocket and let the familiar rhythm steady his bones. 4, 3, pause, turn. The music began, soft strings, a clean drumbeat, the cadence threaded through everything. Serrivane spoke first, voice smooth and intimate. "My court," he said. "Under the hollow moon's peak, we measure a claim." Soft laughter rippled. Expectation gleamed in 100 reflections. Serrivane's silver mask turned toward Andre. "Little Cobbler," he murmured. "Step forward. Be measured." Andre walked to the edge of the silver measure spiral and stopped. He did not cross the line. He held his posture as he had in his shop when a customer tried to talk him down, polite, unyielding, present. Serrivane lifted a hand, fingers moving in a slow pattern that made the hall's hum rise. "State your standing," Serrivane said softly. "Give the court your name so it may know what it weighs." The trap lay open like a polished blade. Andre's mouth went dry. The hum pressed against his skull, urging him toward compliance, urging him to give something. It would be so easy, so human, to answer a question with an answer. Instead, Andre chose his words like a stitch chosen for strength rather than decoration. "I stand on my craft and my intent," Andre said, voice steady. "I came for her." A ripple of amused murmurs ran through the masks. Serrivane's silver mouth smiled. "Intent," he repeated. "How mortal. Intent is wind. I am stone." Andre's gaze stayed on the silver line, not Serrivane's mask. "Wind can carve stone," he said quietly. A delighted gasp fluttered. The court loved a phrase that sounded like a knife hidden in velvet. Serrivane's posture remained perfect, but the air around him tightened. "Then carve," he murmured. "Let us see if you bleed." Serrivane lifted his hand again. "The weighing," he announced, "shall be done in 3 measures." The court hushed. "The first measure," Serrivane said, "is allure." The music shifted. The cadence softened into something sweeter, the kind that made thoughts drift. The mirrors seemed to deepen, reflecting not just bodies but possibilities. Andre felt it immediately, the air trying to pour warmth through him, trying to loosen his resolve with comfort. Images rose in the mirrors at the edges of his vision, Brindlewick bathed in lanternlight, Lulu smiling freely, a workshop filled with laughter, a home without shouting. Then the image twisted. Lulu turned in that reflected home and walked away from him, reaching instead toward a faceless figure in silver who offered her peace that looked like obedience. Andre's stomach turned. The glamour was clever. It didn't show him what he wanted. It showed him what he feared. Serrivane's voice slid through the hall, soft as velvet. "See what you could avoid," he murmured. "Give your name. Give your claim. I will let her go and you will be remembered as the mortal who knew his place." The offer struck a tender part of Andre, because it sounded like rescue. It sounded like the end of pain. But it also sounded like ownership, Serrivane offering Lulu's freedom as if it belonged to him to grant. Andre pressed his fingers hard into the salt pouch in his pocket until the grains bit his skin. Grit grounded him. Pain was honest. He did not answer. He lifted his hand and, under his breath, tapped his thumb against the seam of his coat in the count he had stitched into leather and into his own bones. 4, 3, pause, turn. The sweetness in the air resisted him. His vision blurred. A memory tore loose, something small, something ordinary, gone so abruptly he felt the absence like a missing tooth. He reached for it instinctively and found only blankness. His throat tightened with panic. He forced himself to breathe anyway. Across the spiral, Lulu's gaze sharpened. She drew in a breath, and Andre saw her shoulders settle as if she too had felt the count steady. Serrivane's silver mask tilted. For a heartbeat, the Lord's composure slipped, like a smooth surface cracking. Ah, Serrivane murmured. Stubborn. The court's murmurs turned eager. They could taste conflict. Serrivane lifted his hand again. The second measure, he announced, is law. The silver spiral brightened, pulsing in time with the drumbeat. The hum surged, no longer sweet but firm, pressing like hands against ribs. Words drifted through the hall, formal phrases in a language Andre couldn't fully understand, but he could feel their shape: hooks, loops, knots. Serrivane spoke with measured precision. I offered. She refused. I took. I sheltered. I honored. I claim. Each verb landed like a footfall on the silver line. Lulu stiffened. The cadence tried to pull her body into assent. Her lips parted as if the hall itself wanted her mouth to become a door. Andre's breath came shallow. This was the moment Serrivane wanted, the moment Lulu would be forced to speak under law. But Lulu did not speak. Instead, she raised her chin and lifted her hand, palm out, as if stopping a dance partner. The gesture was simple. Human. The court rustled, intrigued. I will answer in measure, Lulu said, voice clear enough to slice through the hum. Not in words that can be turned into chains. A ripple of delighted laughter. A mortal with rules of her own, how charming. Serrivane's voice stayed smooth. Answer, he invited, and the invitation was a trap disguised as generosity. Lulu stepped forward into the spiral. This time, she wore shoes. Not Serrivane's delicate silk. Not bare feet. Andre's shoes. They were plain in appearance, a modest pair that wouldn't draw notice in Brindlewick's studio. But Andre saw the hidden reinforcement in the way her foot settled, steady, grounded, hers. Lulu's gaze flicked to Andre once, fierce with gratitude and something like apology for making him wait so long. Then she began to dance. She didn't dance the spiral of lanterns. Not exactly. She began with the spiral's opening step, then broke it, turning the pattern inward, making the circle smaller, tighter, like a throat closing. Her arms lifted as if reaching for lanternlight and then drew back as if pulling something away from herself. Her feet moved with perfect measure, but the measure was not Serrivane's. It was Lulu's truth made visible. A girl who wanted harmony and was offered a cage made of praise. The hum in the hall wavered. Serrivane's silver mask turned, sharp. His hand lifted, fingers moving in a counter pattern, trying to pull Lulu's cadence into his own. The mirrors flashed. The spiral brightened. Lulu faltered, just a fraction, and Andre felt his heart seize. He pressed his thumb against the stitched leather token until the thread bit his skin and pushed his own measure into the air with breath and stubborn will. 4, 3, pause, turn. The cost hit immediately. His vision blurred. A name slipped in his mind and refused to settle. He tried to recall a face, Tomlin Kerr's weathered grin, and for a sick heartbeat he couldn't find it. Andre's stomach lurched. He gritted his teeth and held anyway. Lulu's feet steadied. The anchored soles held her to her own rhythm. Her dance sharpened, turning from fear into refusal. She faced Serrivane within the spiral without touching him, without offering him the intimacy he craved. Every step said the same thing. I do not belong to you. Serrivane's voice cut low, no longer amused. Enough, he said, and the word tried to slam down like a door. Lulu did not stop. The court leaned forward in its 100 reflections, hungry for dissonance and spectacle. Serrivane's hand moved faster, more forceful. The hum surged, pressing at Lulu's bones. The silver spiral flared bright. And that was when the mirrors betrayed him. A tremor ran through the reflections, subtle at first, like a ripple in still water. Then the mirrored images of Serrivane's gestures sharpened into something the court could not ignore, the difference between invitation and force. His cadence did not look like devotion. It looked like possession. A hush fell so deep the hall seemed to lose breath. Serrivane froze. For the first time, the Fae Court's attention shifted away from his glamour, away from his smooth claims, and toward the truth that had been hiding under his elegance. He was not measuring love. He was measuring obedience. Lulu's dance ended in a stillness so steady it felt like a vow. She stood in the spiral, breathing hard, chin lifted, eyes bright with fierce, exhausted clarity. Serrivane's silver mask turned toward Andre. The air around him tightened into cold. "You have meddled," Serrivane murmured, voice edged. "You have corrupted the measure with mortal grit." Andre's knees trembled. He forced his voice out. "I gave her footing," he said. "You tried to take her will." Serrivane's silver mouth smiled. "Then we come to the third measure," he said softly. "Cost." The word landed like a stone. Serrivane's gaze fixed on Lulu. "Mortal," he murmured. "Refuse me under witness, and you must balance the refusal. Offer what you value most." Lulu's jaw tightened. She did not look at Serrivane. She looked at Andre. For a heartbeat, Andre saw fear in her, fear that the court would demand something she couldn't bear to give. Fear that refusing would cost her some core piece of herself. Andre's chest cracked open. He stepped forward to the edge of the spiral, voice hoarse. "Do not make her pay for your hunger," he said. Serrivane's mask tilted. "Then you pay," he murmured, and the air shifted, focusing on Andre like a lens. The hum surged toward Andre's skull, sweet and cold, trying to lure him into offering something, his name, his claim, his life, his memories. Andre swayed. He felt memory tear again, another thread pulled loose. A sound from his childhood, maybe. The exact shape of his mother's hands, perhaps. He couldn't tell. Only the hollow space remained. Panic clawed at his throat. He nearly spoke. Not his name, but the truth he'd kept locked away for years. "I love her." The words rose, desperate to be used as currency. And then Andre realized what Serrivane wanted. Not love. Ownership framed as love. If Andre offered his love as payment in this hall, under this cadence, it could become a chain on Lulu just as surely as Serrivane's claim. It would turn Andre's feelings into a hook the court could hang law upon. Andre swallowed hard, tasting honey and iron. He looked at Lulu and saw her stubbornness, the thing Serrivane admired because he thought he could break it, the thing Andre loved because it was hers. Andre chose the only payment that did not bind her. He offered not a claim over Lulu, but a refusal of ownership itself. "I will pay by releasing any right to speak for her," Andre said, voice rough and measured. "I will not claim her. I will only witness her choice." The hall went utterly still. Serrivane's silver mask did not move. "How noble," he murmured, but the word sounded strained now, as if it didn't fit the shape of his mouth. Andre's knees shook. He forced the rest out. "If she chooses to return with me, it will be because she chooses. If she does not, I will leave without dragging her." Lulu's breath hitched. The Fae Court rustled, intrigued. The measure they valued, intent held steady without grasping, was rare even among them. The hum shifted. Not in Serrivane's favor. Because Serrivane's claim depended on everyone accepting the idea that desire becomes right when dressed well enough. Andre had just offered the court a sharper truth. Love without ownership is possible. Lulu's shoulders lifted with a sudden breath, and she turned fully toward Serrivane. Her voice was quiet, but it cut like a blade. "I refuse you," she said. "Not because I fear change. Because I know the difference between peace and silence forced on someone." Serrivane's silver mask tilted. "And what do you offer to balance refusal?" he asked softly, and now the softness was desperation disguised as calm. Lulu lifted her chin. "Nothing that belongs to me," she said. "Because your claim is not a gift. It is a theft. A theft does not get paid. It gets returned." A sound ran through the hall, sharp, delighted, shocked. And then the silver measure spiral dimmed. Not violently. Not with drama. With the quiet finality of law acknowledging itself. The mirrors steadied, and in their 100 reflections, Serrivane's silver mask looked suddenly like what it was, decoration over emptiness. A figure stepped from the crowd, masked in bone-white, garments threaded with midnight. The court's murmurs fell away at the newcomer's presence. Authority. Old law. Lord Serrivane Thorneveyl, the figure said, voice neither cruel nor kind. Your measure is found wanting. Serrivane went utterly still. You cannot, he began, and for the first time his smoothness cracked. The mortal's will was witnessed, the figure replied. And your cadence was witnessed. Serrivane's silver mask turned sharply toward Andre, and Andre felt the bite of hatred beneath the glamour. This human refused to bind her, the figure said, and there was something like faint approval in the tone. Your claim depended on ownership wearing the mask of devotion. Under the hollow moon, masks are thin. A ripple of laughter, low, pleased, moved through the court, not at Lulu this time, but at Serrivane. The most dangerous thing in Feylands was not punishment. It was ridicule under witness. Serrivane's posture tightened like a drawn wire. What is my sentence? He demanded. The bone-white mask tilted. Debt, it said simply. You will repair the dissonance you caused at Brindlewick's border. You will be bound to the riverstones until harmony returns. And you will not approach the mortal lands until the debt is paid. Serrivane's breath hitched. For the first time, Andre saw fear flicker in the stillness of him, fear of being bound, of losing freedom the way he had tried to steal it. Serrivane's silver mask turned toward Lulu one last time. You will regret this, he murmured, voice low and venom-sweet. Mortals are loud. Mortals break. Lulu's voice came clear, unwavering. Then I will break and mend myself without you. Serrivane's silver mask twitched an almost imperceptible crack of composure before guards in midnight thread garments stepped forward. Their hands did not touch him, but the air around Serrivane tightened like rope. He was led from the spiral, still elegant, still furious, but no longer in control. The hall exhaled into delighted murmurs, already turning Serrivane's fall into a story. Andre's knees nearly gave. He gripped the edge of a nearby column until his fingers stopped shaking. Lulu stepped out of the silver measure spiral. She didn't run to Andre. She didn't fling herself into his arms the way stories demanded. She walked, steady, measured across the polished floor, past masks and mirrors and 100 watching eyes. She stopped in front of Andre. For a heartbeat, she simply stood there, breathing, as if verifying that he was real. Then she lifted her hand and placed it lightly on his forearm. Warm. Trembling. Hers. Are you all right? Andre whispered, because his voice could only hold one thing at a time and right now it held concern. Lulu let out a shaky breath that sounded almost like laughter and almost like a sob. I don't know, she admitted softly. But I'm mine. Andre's chest tightened so hard it hurt. He nodded once, because any more would break him. Lulu's gaze flicked toward the mirrors, toward the watching court. We should go, she said. Andre swallowed. Can we? Lulu's eyes sharpened. They released me, she said. And I am done being displayed. Andre turned to the bone-white masked authority, careful not to phrase anything like a request that could become a bargain. The trial is done, he said. The measure is witnessed. The bone-white mask inclined. Go, it said simply. And remember, do not speak your true name in places that hunger for it. Andre's throat tightened. He bowed once and turned away. Lulu didn't hesitate. She walked beside him, hand still on his forearm like a tether, and together they left the mirror hall. The corridors out felt longer than the corridors in, as if the estate didn't want to let them go without making them doubt. The hum pressed at Andre's skull, sweet again, trying to soften his resolve now that the danger had passed. But Lulu's hand stayed steady on his arm, and Andre kept counting under his breath. 4, 3, pause, turn. At the willow-thin place, the air smelled more like real winter than honey, and Andre nearly cried from relief. The darkness between branches waited like a held breath. Lulu stood with her shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the gap as if daring it to try and keep her again. Andre pressed the stitched leather token into Lulu's palm. Hold this, he said softly. It remembers the way. Lulu curled her fingers around it. So do I, she whispered. They stepped through together. Cold struck, then eased, like a door opening into familiar air. And there on the Brindlewick side stood Madam Celinne Quoire, shawl wrapped tight, posture unbending, eyes fierce as a storm held in a glass. Audra Venn stood beside her, salt pouch in hand, chin lifted like she'd been waiting to throw it in someone's face. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Audra made a sound, half laugh, half sob, and hurried forward. She stopped herself an inch from Lulu, as if afraid touching her might make her vanish again. Lulu lifted her hands and grabbed Aula's sleeve with sudden ferocity. I'm here, she breathed, voice shaking. I'm here. Aula's jaw clenched hard enough to ache. Yes you are, she muttered, and then, gruffly, don't you do that to me again. Madam Celinne stepped forward and, with surprising gentleness, touched Lulu's cheek with the back of her fingers. Good, she said, voice tight. Good. Then Madam Celinne's gaze snapped to Andre. You paid, she said quietly, not a question. Andre swallowed. His mouth tasted like honey and salt. I lost something, he admitted, and hated the vagueness because it felt like failure. Madam Celinne's eyes softened the smallest fraction. You held your intent, she said. That matters more than what the Fae tried to sand away. Memory can be rebuilt. Will cannot, once surrendered. Andre nodded, throat burning. Aula shoved a small bundle into Andre's hands, bread wrapped in cloth, still warm. Eat, she ordered. Human bodies don't run on stubbornness alone. Andre blinked, startled by the kindness disguised as command. He managed a horse, thank you. They returned to Brindlewick under lanterns that suddenly looked kind again. The village had not slept either. Word had traveled like fire. People waited in knots at the square, eyes wide, hands clenched. When Lulu appeared beside Andre and Madam Celinne, a hush fell so deep the river seemed louder. Then Ludka ran forward, skirts lifted, hair disheveled, face streaked with tears she hadn't had time to wipe away. Lulu, she choked, and the single name sounded like a prayer. Lulu froze for a heartbeat, as if her body didn't know how to be touched without being claimed. Then Mirel reached her, arms trembling, and hugged her, not tight enough to trap, just enough to prove she was real. Bramwell Ludka followed, face red, eyes bright with fury that had nowhere to land now but relief. He stopped short, fists clenched, and for once he seemed unable to find an argument. I'm here, Lulu said, voice shaking, and looked at both of them. I'm here. Mirel made a broken sound. We're sorry, she whispered, and the words were so unexpected they fell like silence in a noisy room. We're sorry. Bramwell swallowed hard, jaw working. I should've, he stopped, frustrated with his own inability to speak softly. Then he forced it out anyway. I should've listened when you needed quiet. Lulu stared at them, stunned. She didn't forgive everything in a heartbeat. But something in her chest loosened, just a thread. A beginning. At the academy, consequences unfolded in quieter ways. Vessa Norin approached Lulu a week after her return, eyes too bright, mouth tight with shame. She stood at the edge of the studio as if afraid the floor might reject her. I heard what happened, Vessa said, voice thin. I didn't know it could be real. Lulu's hands tightened on the bar. You didn't care if it was real, Lulu said, not cruelly, simply true. You cared that you weren't me. Vessa flinched. Yes, she whispered, and the honesty looked like it hurt. And I'm sorry. Lulu watched her a moment. She did not offer friendship. But she did not offer cruelty either. Don't be sorry, Lulu said. Be better. Madam Celinne's gaze, watching from the center of the room, remained sharp but approving. The Academy's envy didn't vanish, but it grew quieter in the face of what had happened because Brindlewick had learned that attention could become appetite, and cruelty could open doors you never meant to unlock. For Lulu, healing was not a dramatic return to joy. It was small, stubborn work. Some nights she woke with the taste of honey in her mouth and her heart pounding as if she'd been running. Some days she stood in the doorway of the studio and felt her feet refuse to move, memory of forced cadence tightening her muscles. Andre never told her to be brave. He never told her to move on. He simply showed up. He brought repaired slippers when hers wore thin. He walked beside her in silence when words felt too loud. He sat on the bench outside the academy and waited without making her feel observed. When Lulu spoke, he listened as if each word mattered. When she didn't speak, he didn't try to pry sound out of her like a locked drawer. And gradually, Lulu found her dance again, not as escape from noise, but as joy chosen freely. One afternoon, about a month after her return, Lulu came to the cobbler's shop and found Andre at his bench, brow furrowed in concentration as he stitched. The shop smelled of leather and winter air. Familiar. Safe. Lulu stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him, letting herself see the truth she had avoided for years. Andre had always been steady. She had simply been too afraid to want steadiness, because wanting felt like inviting disappointment. Andre looked up. His expression softened. "Hi," he said, as if he'd been waiting. Lulu's mouth twitched. "Hi." Andre set his work down carefully. "Do your shoes need mending?" Lulu shook her head. "No." Andre blinked, uncertain. "Then, are you all right?" Lulu took a slow breath. Her hands clenched, then relaxed. "I think so," she said softly. "Or, I'm learning what all right feels like." Andre's gaze held hers, steady and gentle. "That's good." Lulu swallowed. Her heart beat hard, not with fear this time, but with something like courage. "You said something in the mirror hall," she murmured. "That you wouldn't claim me." Andre's face tightened, shame flickering. "I meant," he began, then stopped, searching. "I meant I wouldn't bind you. Not even with my feelings." Lulu stepped closer, slow. "You didn't bind me," she said. "You freed me." Andre's throat worked. "Lulu." She lifted a hand, palm out, the same gesture she'd used in the spiral. Not to stop him. To steady them both. "I've spent my whole life thinking love sounds like shouting," Lulu said, voice quiet. "Thinking marriage is two people trying to win." Andre's eyes softened, aching with understanding. He didn't interrupt. Lulu swallowed. "But you," her voice shook. She forced it steady. "You love like you mend shoes. Patient. Honest. Quiet. You don't pull. You don't demand." Andre's breath hitched. His hands curled at the edge of the bench as if holding himself in place. Lulu's eyes shone. "I want a home like the one you described," she whispered. "Peaceful. Not empty. Just kind." Andre stared at her as if he couldn't trust his ears. "Lulu," he said, voice rough, "I." She took the last step and set her hand on his forearm, warm and steady. "Say it," she whispered. "But don't say it like a bargain." Andre's eyes squeezed shut for a heartbeat, as if bracing himself. Then he opened them and looked at her with a quiet fierceness that made Lulu's chest ache. "I love you," Andre said simply. No flourish. No demand. Just truth offered with open hands. "And I don't want anything from you that you don't want to give." Lulu's breath shook. She let herself smile, small, real, surprised by how safe it felt. "Good," she whispered, and her voice trembled with relief. "Because I want to give you my yes." Andre's shoulders sagged as if he'd been holding an entire winter on his spine. He laughed once, breathless, and the sound was more vulnerable than any grand confession could have been. Lulu didn't leap into his arms. She wasn't a girl who became suddenly fearless. But she did something she'd never done before without flinching. She took Andre's hand and held it, fingers interlacing slowly, as if teaching her own body a new rhythm. 3 months after Lulu returned from Fey Lands, Brindlewick hung lanterns again, not for a performance, not for visiting lords, not for applause. For a wedding. The ceremony was small and warm. The river ran clear under winter sun. Lanterns bobbed from hooks, their light soft in the afternoon shade. Madam Celinne stood with her arms folded, looking disapproving of sentiment and secretly proud. Orla Ven wore her best shawl and pretended she wasn't crying by claiming the wind was rude. Lulu wore a simple dress that moved when she breathed, and Andre wore clean boots he'd made himself, stitched honest and strong. When it came time to speak names, Lulu took a breath and said, with a faint smile that made the village laugh gently through their tears, "Lulu, Lubentia, Lucena, Lumilla, Luanna, Ludka," as if claiming every ridiculous syllable as hers, not a joke, not a burden, but a story survived. Andre's gaze warmed. He didn't tease. He simply held her hand a little tighter, like he was proud of her for existing so stubbornly. Their vows were not poetry. They were promises that sounded like craftsmanship. I will listen. I will apologize when I am wrong. I will not turn disagreement into war. I will build with you. I will keep your will safe. When the final words were spoken, Lulu and Andre stood beneath lantern light with the river singing softly nearby, and Lulu felt something settle inside her that she had never felt in her parents' house. Harmony, not as a performance, but as a daily choice. Later, when the guests drifted away and the lanterns swung gently in the evening breeze, Lulu and Andre walked together toward the small home they would build above the cobbler's shop, rooms that smelled of leather and bread and clean air, rooms where silence would be a comfort rather than a warning. Lulu squeezed Andre's hand and glanced at the lantern hooks lining the street. I think, she said softly, I might twirl the first time I step over the threshold. Andre's smile warmed, quiet and sure. As long as the floor holds you, he said. Lulu's eyes brightened. It will, she replied. Because this time, the measure was hers.